Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a look at one of the most unusual events in Greek mythology, the time Apollo, the radiant god of the sun, decided to take a day off. Imagine it, the whole world is going about its business, and then suddenly, without warning, the sun just doesn't rise. No Apollo guiding his chariot across the sky. The world begins to cool down, and people are starting to notice. Even the gods, used to Apollo's constant, blazing presence, can't figure out what's going on. Apollo, it seems, has taken a rare, and possibly dangerous, break. You probably won't survive this one, though. You'd need Apollo's sunlight to keep you going. Imagine navigating a day without the warmth of the sun. It's hard to believe, isn't it? So, before you get comfortable and start pondering what it'd be like to live without daylight, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love hearing where all of you are from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're going to discover why Apollo, of all gods, decided to take a break and how the world below reacted when it happened. It all begins with Apollo himself, the sun god, the one who rides across the sky each day in his golden chariot, bringing light and warmth to the earth. You've probably seen depictions of him, a handsome, youthful figure with radiant beams of light. His job was to make sure everything from crops to animals to mortals depended on him. His daily trip across the sky was not just a routine, but a necessity. But on this day, Apollo, for reasons only he understood, decided he was done. Just imagine the chaos when Apollo, usually so predictable, simply decided to take a day off. The first few hours were subtle. At first, it just felt a little colder than usual. The farmers didn't notice, and the sailors were still setting out, thinking it was just an overcast day. But as the hours passed, the chill in the air started to grow. People started noticing something wasn't right. The crops, still dependent on the warmth of Apollo's light, weren't growing as they should, and the animals were restless. There was something off in the atmosphere. Historians still argue about Apollo's reasoning for taking a break. Was he simply exhausted from centuries of work, or was this a deliberate pause in the cosmic order? Some suggest he needed a moment to recharge, while others think this was his way of proving us how much power he had over the world. Whatever the reason, Apollo's decision to rest had far-reaching consequences. The world began to cool, and it didn't take long for mortals to realize what had happened. The sky had dimmed. It wasn't the harsh darkness of night, but a strange, unfamiliar twilight that made everything feel off. People started looking up to the heavens, expecting to see Apollo's chariot, his shining face pulling the sun across the sky. But all they saw was a dull, clouded sky. Nothing was happening. The world didn't exactly fall apart right away, but people couldn't ignore the change. They tried to go on with their lives, but the absence of Apollo's sun was like a missing puzzle piece. Without Apollo, time began to feel different. Days seemed longer, or maybe they were just heavier. Farmers in Greece found that their crops weren't growing as fast without the sun's warmth. Sailors, too, found the seas unnervingly colder, as if the sky itself had decided to take a step back. As the hours dragged on, people began to panic. Farmers prayed to Demeter, asking for help with the crops. Sailors turned their prayers toward Poseidon, asking for calmer seas. But no one knew where Apollo had gone. It was as though the sun itself had simply vanished. Was Apollo taking a break, or had something happened to him? Mortals were left in confusion, while the gods, up in Olympus, began to wonder if they should step in. Historians still debate what Apollo was doing while he was on his day off. Did he just decide to rest in some quiet corner of the heavens, away from the eternal responsibilities of the sun god? Or was there something more at play? Perhaps Apollo wanted to make a point about the world's dependence on his daily role. It's unclear, but one thing is for sure. Apollo's absence caused some ripples in the cosmic order. Even the gods, despite their divine nature, could not avoid the consequences of his missing presence. As Apollo continued his unannounced break, the world below was growing increasingly anxious. The absence of the sun was starting to feel like more than just an odd occurrence. It was beginning to feel like something was fundamentally wrong. The first signs of the sun's absence were small, almost imperceptible. The morning chill lingered a bit longer than usual. The sky, usually bright and vibrant, remained muted and gray. People tried to brush it off as just another cloudy day, but as the day wore on, it became clear. Apollo was nowhere to be found. The sun had stopped moving across the sky. A strange stillness had settled over the world. Now, let's take a moment to understand just how much Apollo's absence affected life. You might think that it was just a cloudy day, right? A bit colder than usual. But imagine this, Apollo wasn't just responsible for sunlight. His daily passage across the sky was more than a simple celestial routine. It was a fundamental part of life itself. Apollo's ride across the heavens marked the passage of time. It regulated the seasons, controlled the tides, and most importantly, it ensured that life on Earth had the warmth and light it needed to survive. Without Apollo, time felt strange. The day didn't feel like a day anymore. There was no warmth to guide the hours, no sunlight to mark the passing moments. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greeks saw time in the way we do today. Did they keep track of time as we do now, with clocks and calendars? Or was their sense of time more fluid, marked by the rising and setting of the sun, by the cycle of nature? Either way, Apollo's absence disrupted the flow of time itself. For the first time, mortals truly felt the weight of Apollo's responsibilities. They were used to the predictable rhythm of day and night. But now, the world felt off balance, as if the gears of the universe were misfiring. Daylight was stretched too long, and the night seemed to arrive too early. Some people began to fear that perhaps they were witnessing the unraveling of the natural order. While the world below struggled to cope, the gods were equally puzzled by Apollo's unexpected absence. You might think the gods had everything under control up there on Mount Olympus, but even they were unsure about how to respond to a sun god who simply decided to take a break. It's not like Apollo had ever done this before. He had his duties, his place in the grand scheme of things, and now he was nowhere to be found. Zeus, the king of the gods, was the first to realize that things were getting out of hand. He summoned the other Olympians to discuss the situation. A council meeting in Olympus was always a serious matter. Gods don't just gather to discuss trivial things. Right. They were used to dealing with larger issues. Chaotic monsters, rebellion, war. But the sun god taking a break, that was new territory. Zeus, looking down upon the mortal world, could see the confusion spreading across the land. Without Apollo's radiant glow, the earth was becoming cold and lifeless. Even the other gods could feel the tension building. But what could they do? Apollo was the only one who could truly fill his role. Could they do anything to help? Or was this a matter that could only be resolved by the sun god himself? Hermes, always the mischievous one, suggested that they just send a message to Apollo, pleading with him to return to work. It seemed simple enough, right? But even Hermes wasn't sure if Apollo would listen. After all, gods have their moods, and Apollo was known for being a bit stubborn. Meanwhile, the mortal world wasn't waiting around. People began to gather in groups, praying to the gods for an answer. What were they supposed to do without the sun? Would the world freeze in darkness forever? The gods had to act quickly before things spiraled out of control. The very balance of the cosmos seemed to be at risk. Could the world survive without Apollo's sun? Would time simply stop? There was more at stake than anyone realized. As mortals prayed and the gods debated, the tension continued to grow. Historians still argue whether the gods, even with their infinite power, could have fixed the problem without Apollo himself. Could the gods have taken over the sun god's duties, even temporarily? Some say yes. After all, they were gods. Others argue that the celestial roles were so tied to their personalities that even Zeus couldn't step into Apollo's shoes. Apollo, meanwhile, seemed blissfully unaware of the growing panic. What was he doing while the world below suffered from his absence? Some stories suggest he was simply resting in a secluded part of the heavens, away from his usual duties. It was said that he had been working tirelessly for millennia, ensuring that the sun rose and set each day, bringing light to every corner of the earth. Perhaps, just for a moment, he wanted to experience what it felt like to have nothing to do. Historians still debate whether his actions were deliberate or simply a cosmic fluke. After all, gods do need their time off, don't they? Apollo's break wasn't something the gods had planned for, but it was also clear that something deeper was happening. Was this a test of sorts, a chance for the world, and the gods, to learn what it meant to rely on something greater than themselves? And what did Apollo learn from his short vacation from the sun? Was he going to return with newfound wisdom? Or would this experience be the first in many that would ultimately lead Apollo to question his endless duties? As Apollo's day off stretched in 2 hours, the world below was beginning to feel the full weight of his absence. The sun, which had never before taken a break, was now missing, leaving the land bathed in unnatural twilight. People who relied on the regular warmth and light of the sun began to worry that something catastrophic was happening. It wasn't just the cooling temperatures or the strange lack of light that unsettled them. What worried the mortals the most was the profound sense of unease that crept into everything. The usual rhythm of life, so dependent on the reliable appearance of Apollo's sun, had been interrupted. Without the sun's warmth, crops began to wither, and the air became heavy. Even the animals, sensitive to changes in the sky, seemed uneasy, their usual movements more sluggish, their behavior unpredictable. The panic was spreading, and with it, the prayers intensified. Mortals, who once went about their daily routines without much thought to the gods, now found themselves in desperate supplication. Every temple, every altar was filled with those calling out to Apollo, begging him to return and restore the order of the world. The usual rituals, offering food, burning incense, felt futile now. People didn't just need an offering to honor the gods, they needed the sun god himself. They were pleading for the source of their very life to return, but Apollo, it seemed, had taken his break a little too seriously. Meanwhile, in Olympus, the gods were growing increasingly concerned. Zeus, in particular, was no stranger to crises, but this was different. He was used to commanding the skies, controlling storms and winds, but the sun, that was Apollo's domain. The other gods were starting to get impatient. Hermes had tried sending messages, but Apollo was stubborn. He wasn't answering. The gods weren't used to waiting like this. It was almost as if Apollo's absence was testing them in ways they weren't prepared for. Were they helpless without the sun? Was there any way to restore order to the cosmos without Apollo? As Zeus paced the halls of Olympus, the other gods began offering their solutions. Ares, always ready for action, suggested sending a battalion of gods to force Apollo back into his chariot. "We can bring him back by force," Ares said with his usual bravado. But Hera, ever the voice of caution, shook her head. "You cannot force a god to do what he does not want to do. Apollo may be stubborn, but he is not one to be commanded, even by Zeus." It wasn't just the sun's absence that was causing trouble, it was the disruption to time itself. Apollo's task wasn't just about light, it was about maintaining the cosmic order. Day and night, warmth and cold, the rise and fall of tides, these things were controlled by Apollo's movements. His decision to take a day off was no small matter. Some believed that Apollo's absence was creating a rift in the very fabric of time. Without his guidance, the day seemed to stretch on forever, and the night came too soon, leaving the world disoriented. The natural order was shifting, and even the gods felt the tension. Even more troubling, the mortal world began to notice the strange effects on time and seasons. The longer the sun stayed absent, the more the environment started to shift. The longer day led to confusion in the natural world. Animals went to bed too early, plants bloomed prematurely, and the night seemed to last forever, leaving farmers uncertain when to plant their crops. "It feels like time is slipping away," a worried farmer might have said, but no one was quite sure how to fix it. Was this just a momentary glitch? Or was Apollo truly gone from the heavens? Meanwhile, Apollo, far from the turmoil he had caused, was reveling in his moment of peace. In a secluded corner of the cosmos, Apollo stretched out, basking in his first true break. The sun god, known for his constant motion, was finally allowing himself a pause, a rare moment to reflect and recharge. Why not? Even I deserve a day off, he might have mused to himself. It was a thought that was almost too human for a god of his stature. Resting, reflecting, and looking at the world from a distance. Apollo's role in the grand scheme of things had always been to work relentlessly, to shine without respite. But in this strange, peaceful interlude, he realized something. Perhaps this moment was necessary. Perhaps even gods, bound to their eternal roles, needed a pause from their endless duties. Historians still debate Apollo's decision to rest. Was it an intentional move, a form of divine rebellion against the constant expectations placed on him? Or was it a momentary lapse, a whim that Apollo indulged in during an otherwise predictable existence? Some scholars suggest that Apollo's decision to take a break might have been a test of the god's own reliance on him. If he could take a day off and see what happened, would the world still continue to function in his absence? Was his presence truly as essential as he had always thought? Others believe that Apollo needed a brief respite to reevaluate his eternal role. After all, even gods grow weary. Regardless of the reason, Apollo's absence was now undeniable. The world below was beginning to feel the weight of the sun's absence, and the gods were getting anxious. With each passing moment, Apollo's rare day off had far-reaching consequences. The balance between day and night, the order of time itself, was beginning to unravel. Would the world find a way to restore order without Apollo's guidance, or would they have to wait until Apollo, at his own leisure, decided to return to his celestial chariot? As Apollo continued his brief hiatus from the cosmos, the world below was starting to feel the full weight of his absence. The landscape, usually bathed in the golden glow of daylight, was now caught in a kind of eerie twilight. The earth seemed to be holding its breath. It wasn't the type of darkness that naturally followed nightfall. It was something more unsettling. The animals, their internal clocks thrown off by Apollo's missing rays, began to act out of character. Birds, usually perched at dawn, were restless, calling to one another in confusion. Livestock wandered aimlessly, unsure whether it was time to graze or sleep. Even the trees seemed disturbed, their leaves flickering in the unnatural light as if waiting for something, or someone, to set things right. Now, imagine being one of the ancient Greeks living during this cosmic disruption. Your entire life had been built around the consistency of the sun, farming, traveling, and even worshipping. And suddenly, there was no sun, no Apollo. The Greek world was based on cycles, the rhythmic flow of day and night. And here, in the middle of a bright but oddly dim day, everything felt unbalanced. The sky remained a muted shade, a strange in-between, and mortals didn't know whether it was the end of the world or just an inconvenient, temporary glitch in the gods' timetable. The Greeks were practical folk, but they also loved their myths. When they saw the sun refuse to make its usual appearance, fear gripped their hearts. Some whispered that the gods were angry. Others suggested that Apollo had been punished, maybe even taken captive by some unseen enemy. As word of Apollo's absence spread, mortal communities began to gather. In the open squares, farmers and traders huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. Should they pray to Zeus for help? Perhaps Hera might step in. The great gods of Olympus had their roles, but it was clear Apollo was the one who governed the light. He had been doing it for centuries. Some began to suspect that this was no ordinary day off. It might be a sign of something bigger. Perhaps the divine order was breaking down, and the gods themselves had begun to question their responsibilities. Maybe even the mighty Apollo himself was reevaluating his place in the cosmic machine. Meanwhile, up on Mount Olympus, the gods were starting to bicker over who should take responsibility for this sudden crisis. Zeus, always the authoritative leader, was not pleased by the disruption. But what could he do? Apollo was one of the most powerful gods. His domain was essential. It wasn't like Zeus could just step in and fill in for his son godson. He looked to his fellow Olympians for advice. Hera, who rarely offered help without an agenda, suggested that Apollo simply needed to be reminded of his duties. But how do you remind the god of the sun to do his job? You can't exactly send him a memo. Hermes, the messenger god, was the first to take action. He tried to reach Apollo directly, attempting to find the sun god lounging around somewhere, enjoying his break. But Apollo was elusive. Maybe he didn't want to be found. What would he even say when Hermes confronted him? Would Apollo be upset at being interrupted? Or would he be willing to explain himself? Hermes, known for his quick wit and cleverness, soon realized that he couldn't just rush in with demands. Apollo needed to have his moment of peace, perhaps a rare opportunity for reflection, though surely there had to be some balance. Apollo, it turned out, wasn't just lounging in solitude without any purpose. He was actually having an epiphany. Yes, the sun god, typically so busy lighting the world with his golden rays, was suddenly struck by the cosmic scale of his own role. His break was more than a chance to rest. It was a chance to step back and consider his place in the universe. What would happen if Apollo just stopped for a while? Would the world continue to function? Could the gods, too, take a moment away from their eternal roles? Maybe this was Apollo's way of seeking balance in an otherwise relentless existence. Historians still argue whether Apollo's decision to take a break was a test of the divine order, or whether it was simply a fleeting moment of rebellion. Some claim that Apollo's decision to rest was a cosmic challenge for both the gods and mortals, an invitation to reconsider their reliance on him. Others suggest that this break was inevitable. Gods are bound to take breaks just like anyone, and even Apollo needed a moment of self-reflection. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Apollo, ever the thoughtful god, was taking the time to pause and reflect on what it meant to be a god in a world that constantly needed him. Down below, mortals weren't aware of Apollo's deep internal reflection. They were too busy trying to make sense of the confusion. With every passing hour, the world became less and less like the world they knew. Time seemed to warp. The longer Apollo stayed absent, the more unsettling the silence became. The usual daylight seemed to stretch on forever, an endless loop of muted colors, like a painting that was never quite finished. No sunrise, no sunset, just an ongoing twilight. By this point, mortals were growing desperate. They began to offer sacrifices to Apollo's fellow gods, hoping to find a way to convince him to return to his celestial duties. The whispers that the gods were angry began to spread. Was Apollo's absence a divine punishment? Would the world be plunged into eternal darkness if Apollo refused to return to his chariot? Some began to fear that their prayers would go unheard, and the cosmos itself would collapse. And yet, even as the world below trembled with uncertainty, the gods, who were watching from Olympus, began to realize that Apollo was not just playing games. His absence had a deeper purpose. He wasn't just skipping his workday. Apollo was attempting to understand what it meant to truly take a break from his eternal duties and, in turn, what the world would be like without him. As Apollo's day off stretched into the second half of the day, things were starting to get really strange. It wasn't just that the sun hadn't moved across the sky, though that alone was enough to set the world spinning. The effects were much broader. Without Apollo, the day itself felt warped, almost like time was refusing to behave properly. Farmers watched their crops slow down, as if waiting for something, or someone, to set the clock back in motion. They couldn't even tell if it was still afternoon or if the evening had come early. Some of the more superstitious folks began whispering that Apollo was angry with them, or that they had failed him somehow. Others felt something darker stirring in the air, an eerie stillness, a sense that perhaps something far more serious than a simple absence was happening. Yet, despite the turmoil below, Apollo remained on his break. Up in the heavens, far away from mortal worries, he was doing something few gods ever got the luxury of doing, thinking. It was a rarity for Apollo, who was always busy driving his sun chariot across the sky, to have time to himself. He had always been expected to perform this task without complaint, without pause. The golden chariot needed to be drawn across the sky at the same time every day, never faltering. For the first time in centuries, Apollo was experiencing what it felt like to take a break from the endless grind. Apollo wasn't just resting physically, though. He was reflecting on his life and the weight of his celestial role. Was he really meant to be the god who illuminated the world day after day, year after year? Was there any respite for him from this relentless task? He couldn't deny that the break had brought him some clarity. It had given him a chance to take a step back and realize that even gods could feel overwhelmed by their responsibilities. Perhaps even Apollo deserved a moment of respite, of reflection. However, as Apollo meditated on his existence, it became clear that the world below wasn't functioning the same way without him. While he was considering the philosophical implications of his eternal job, the mortals and even his fellow gods were beginning to notice the real consequences of his absence. The Earth's natural order was starting to fray, just a little bit at first, and then more significantly, the seas, which were usually guided by Poseidon, seemed off too. The tides didn't quite feel right. The usual rise and fall of the waves was uneven, erratic, as though even the forces of nature were confused. Farmers started to hear reports of their fields becoming too dry, while other areas experienced strange, unexpected rains. The gods, watching the chaos from Olympus, began to understand that Apollo's absence wasn't a simple matter. This wasn't just a missed sunrise. It was the very essence of balance in the cosmos that had been disrupted. The gods on Olympus began to feel uneasy. Even Zeus, the king of the gods, was concerned now. He had watched Apollo work tirelessly for centuries without a break. But seeing the world unravel in his absence made Zeus wonder, had Apollo's role been taken for granted? Could the gods really function without one of their most important members? Could the universe itself even work properly without the sun god guiding the day? Zeus wasn't the type to admit weakness, but even he couldn't ignore that the loss of Apollo was beginning to unravel some of the balance he had worked so hard to maintain. Hermes, always the quick thinker, saw an opportunity. Instead of simply sending messages to Apollo, he thought maybe a different approach was needed. He would go to Apollo directly and try to reason with him. After all, even gods had their moments of reflection. Hermes knew Apollo well enough to understand that, while Apollo was capable of immense power, he was also deeply contemplative and somewhat solitary. Perhaps this pause was not just a way of taking a break, but a chance for Apollo to learn something new, something about himself. Hermes found Apollo resting in a serene corner of the cosmos, far from the hustle and bustle of his usual duties. The sun god had taken this rare opportunity to relax, and Hermes didn't want to intrude too abruptly. He approached with his usual charm, trying to understand the mood Apollo was in. Hermes wasn't just any messenger. He had a knack for bringing levity to even the most tense situations, and he hoped his approach would bring Apollo back to reality, so to speak. "Hey there, Apollo," Hermes said, his voice light and easy, a contrast to the tension building on Earth. "I see you're taking it easy today. Quite the break from your usual routine." "Huh?" Apollo, lounging in the sky, looked up, slightly surprised to see Hermes. "I've earned this, haven't I? Every day I'm on the clock, pushing the sun across the sky. It's time for a pause." Hermes, leaning against a nearby cloud, grinned. "You've definitely earned it. But, I think the world below might need you a little bit right now. The people are starting to freak out, and I mean freak out. It's like they've never experienced a cloudy day before." Apollo raised an eyebrow. "What's the big deal? A day off is supposed to bring peace. Let them deal with it. Why do I always have to be the one to carry the weight of the world?" Hermes chuckled, his expression softening. "Well, sometimes, even gods need a little time to think. But remember, the world does sort of depend on your light. You might have forgotten that part." "Huh?" Apollo sighed, looking up at the cosmos. "I suppose it's hard to forget the constant demand for my rays. But perhaps I've learned something today." Hermes, sensing a shift, smiled. "Maybe it's time to go back to work then. Not just for them, but for you, too." Apollo didn't respond immediately. He seemed to be contemplating the balance he had been so used to maintaining. After a pause, he finally spoke. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's not just about shining. It's about making sure that when I return, the world is ready for me. With a soft sigh, Apollo rose from his celestial resting place. He stretched, feeling the familiar hum of energy begin to pulse through his body once more. After a brief moment of reflection, he seemed to have come to a decision. His brief break had served its purpose. He now understood the delicate balance he held over the world below. He wasn't just a source of light, he was the linchpin that held the cosmic order together. His absence had shown him how deeply his actions affected everything, from the tiniest blade of grass to the highest mountain top. Apollo had learned that the world, while vibrant and full of life, also relied heavily on his consistency. As Apollo got back to his duties, the first rays of sunlight began to shine through the dull clouds, slowly but surely. It wasn't an immediate burst of blinding light, but a gradual softening of the day's harsh dimness. The land, once filled with tension and confusion, began to breathe again, the familiar warmth spreading slowly across the earth. Farmers felt the warmth return to their crops. Sailors, once hesitant to set sail without their guiding star, now found their confidence restored. Even the animals, who had been behaving oddly, seemed to settle down, returning to their normal routines. The people on Earth, who had grown anxious and unsure, now looked up in awe as the sun began its journey across the sky once again. They felt a wave of relief. Time, which had felt so warped and elongated without Apollo, suddenly snapped back into its familiar rhythm. It was as if the world had been holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable return of the sun. There was no applause, no grand ceremony, but the people felt it. The steady warmth of the sun was a comfort, a reminder that things were as they should be. In Olympus, the gods watched as Apollo resumed his celestial duties. Zeus, who had been concerned at first, allowed himself a small, relieved smile. Though the gods could often be distant and detached from the everyday struggles of mortals, they had learned something too. Even they, with all their power, had come to realize just how much the world relied on the balance they created. It was easy to take things for granted when you were an immortal god, but this little cosmic experiment, Apollo's day off, had shown them the consequences of imbalance. Apollo's brief absence had served as a reminder of just how fragile the world was, and how necessary his role was in keeping it functioning. Hermes, who had played a key role in reaching Apollo, looked at his fellow gods with a mischievous grin. "Well," he said, "I guess it wasn't such a big deal after all, was it? I told you Apollo needed some time to himself." Hera, standing beside Zeus, raised an eyebrow. Time to himself, indeed. Perhaps next time we won't be so quick to let him take a break. The gods chuckled, and while there was an underlying tension, there was also a sense of relief. It was clear that Apollo had learned something important, but so had they. The world, both mortal and divine, functioned best when everyone played their part, without interruption. As Apollo resumed his duties with a newfound appreciation for the role he played in the grand scheme of things, he reflected on what had just transpired. His brief absence had shown him how much he was valued, not just by the gods, but by the entire cosmos. The world depended on the sun's regular cycle, on the light and warmth he provided. But he also realized something else, that even gods, like mortals, needed time to recharge. Perhaps this was the lesson he needed to learn all along. In the hustle of eternal responsibilities, it was easy to forget the importance of rest and reflection. While the sun god resumed his daily task with his usual vigor, there was something softer about him now. He no longer saw his celestial role as a burden, but as a vital part of the cosmic tapestry. He had always been a symbol of energy and light, but now, he understood that there was a deeper meaning to his work. His purpose wasn't just about shining brightly every day, it was about bringing balance, keeping time, and providing a steady rhythm that the universe could rely on. As Apollo's chariot continued across the sky, the world below seemed to settle back into its natural flow. The sky, once clouded and strange, now sparkled with the familiar golden glow. Time resumed its usual pace, the day once again following the rhythm it always had. The people, while unaware of Apollo's brief journey into reflection, felt the steady warmth returning to their lives. The light that had been missing was now back, and with it, a renewed sense of peace. Even the gods, watching from Olympus, felt the harmony return to the cosmos. The disruption had been brief, but it had taught them all a valuable lesson in the importance of balance, both in the divine and the mortal realms. Yet, for Apollo, the break had been more than just a day off. It had been an opportunity to reconsider his place in the grand design. He wasn't just a god whose job was to move the sun across the sky. He was an essential force in maintaining the very rhythm of life. The world below relied on him. Yes, but so did the gods above. Even in a universe filled with powerful beings, Apollo understood now that sometimes the most important thing was to step back, take a breath, and remember why his role was so vital in the first place. With Apollo's sun beginning to rise in the sky again, all seemed well in the world, at least on the surface. People resumed their daily lives, none the wiser to the celestial drama that had just unfolded. Farmers, who had once feared for their crops, now saw the golden light returning to their fields, and their worrying turned to relief. Sailors, who had been hesitant to venture out in the strange, sunless world, once again set their course, guided by the warmth of Apollo's rays. The animals, too, once confused by the shifting daylight, returned to their normal routines, grazing, resting, and playing as though nothing had ever been amiss. But what about the gods? The divine beings who watched all of this unfold from their lofty perch in Olympus had learned something profound, something they hadn't fully anticipated. Apollo's absence, brief as it was, revealed the degree to which the gods, despite their immense power, had come to depend on one another. The natural order, once disrupted, could not simply be set right by a wave of Zeus's hand or Hermes' quick thinking. It required the cooperation and balance of each god fulfilling their sacred duties. Zeus, the king of the gods, had always been the one to handle the grand affairs, storms, wars, and the shifting of fate itself. But this was a different kind of balance, one that even he hadn't fully understood until now. Watching the earth go without the sun made Zeus realize just how much their world, even as divine as it was, relied on routine. His own reign wasn't just about wielding thunder and lightning. It was about maintaining cosmic harmony. And Apollo, for all his shining brilliance, was a cornerstone of that harmony. As Apollo continued his journey across the sky, returning to his well-worn task of driving the sun, he couldn't help but feel a sense of change inside himself. The break had not only offered him rest, but it had also provided him with a new perspective. For the first time, he had seen just how much his role mattered, not just to the mortals below, but to the gods themselves. It had been easy for him to take his daily ride across the heavens for granted, but now, he realized, every moment of that journey was a part of something far larger than his own existence. His light and warmth were not just a gift to the earth, they were an essential part of the divine order, a force that bound all of existence together. But even as Apollo returned to his duties with a newfound sense of purpose, he wasn't entirely sure how to explain his brief absence to his fellow gods. They had, after all, noticed the disruption, and they were no strangers to the idea of divine responsibility. Apollo, in his quiet moments of reflection, wondered what it would be like to explain himself to the others. Would they understand? Or would they criticize him for taking such an unprecedented break, no matter how necessary it might have been? The gods, too, had been pondering the meaning of the entire episode. Even Hermes, who had been the most active in trying to resolve the crisis, couldn't help but feel that this event had deeper implications for the divine order. Could the gods afford to take breaks, to pause and reflect, as Apollo had done? Or was it a dangerous precedent, one that threatened the very balance they were supposed to maintain? One thing was certain, this unusual event had sparked a conversation that none of the gods had ever had before. Apollo, for all his radiant energy, had taught them something about themselves. Even the most powerful beings in the cosmos needed moments of rest, of reflection, and perhaps most importantly, of understanding their true role in the grand design. As Apollo soared higher into the sky, painting the world below with the golden hues of his light. He realized that, for the first time in eons, he felt more connected to the world he illuminated. The earth, the gods, the mortals, they were all part of this vast, interconnected system that needed to work in harmony. He wasn't just Apollo, the sun god. He was a crucial piece of a much larger puzzle. Down below, life continued to pulse forward. The worries of the mortals, their short-term fears and desires, seemed so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But Apollo knew better than to think of them as mere bystanders. Their lives, their struggles, their joys, they were all part of the cycle he helped sustain. Every sunrise, every sunset, every moment of light he provided was an essential part of the mortal experience. The gods, still in their divine realms, were beginning to understand the true significance of their roles. The divine balance was fragile, dependent not just on their power, but on their cooperation. The absence of one could cause ripples throughout the cosmos, and perhaps Apollo's brief departure had reminded them all that, even as gods, they were not infallible. They needed each other. They needed their time to rest, to reflect, and to understand their place in the vast expanse of the universe. But Apollo also realized something else during his break, something that had been nagging at him for some time. He had always been the one who provided light and warmth. It was his duty, his destiny. But perhaps the real lesson from his break was this: the light he gave wasn't just a gift, it was part of a greater balance. He wasn't the only one who mattered in this divine puzzle. The earth needed him, yes, but he too needed the earth and the gods to remain in their own place, doing their part. As the sun began to set that evening, Apollo reflected on the lesson he had learned. The cosmic balance was delicate, and though he would always be the one to bring the sun across the sky, he now understood that he wasn't alone in his task. The gods, the mortals, and even the earth itself were all part of this intricate dance. Apollo wasn't just a shining god on high. He was part of something much larger, something that required every piece to be in its place for the universe to function. And so, as the first stars began to twinkle in the twilight, Apollo's light softened, signaling the end of another day. He had learned something valuable, not just about his role in the cosmos, but about the importance of balance, both for gods and mortals alike. As Apollo's chariot descended beneath the horizon and the night began to embrace the world, a quiet calm settled over both the heavens and the earth. The mortal world, once in a state of mild panic, could now breathe easy again, though they still had no idea about the inner workings of their divine world. The sun was back in its usual place, guiding the earth with its golden rays. Yet Apollo, in his celestial chariot, had learned something invaluable. It wasn't just about filling the heavens with light. It was about understanding how every moment, every role, and every action, no matter how divine, fit into a greater balance. While the gods in Olympus were beginning to resume their divine duties, there was still a lingering sense of wonder and contemplation. The sun had set, but in the quiet shadows, the gods knew that their eternal duties had been subtly altered. What Apollo had experienced wasn't just a break, it was a revelation, a chance to pause and recognize how important it was to maintain harmony, not only in the heavens, but in their relationships with the mortals who depended on them. Apollo's break had caused a ripple in the fabric of the divine order, and for the first time, it was clear to all that even gods needed time to reflect on their roles. Zeus, ever the leader, was especially reflective that evening. He had seen the chaos unfold when Apollo was absent. He, too, had realized something crucial. The gods couldn't just continue their eternal tasks without recognizing their limits. Apollo's absence hadn't just disturbed the mortal world. It had caused uncertainty among the gods, revealing how fragile their roles could be if one element in the divine hierarchy were to falter. It was a reminder to Zeus, Hera, and the others that their divine roles weren't just to be assumed. They needed constant reflection, just as the world below did. In the aftermath, Hermes found himself chuckling at the entire situation. He had been the one to push Apollo to return, but in doing so, he realized that the sun god's break wasn't about rebellion or laziness. It was about realizing the deeper implications of his divine responsibility. Apollo wasn't the only god with power. Each of them held sway over different aspects of life and nature. But Apollo's role was unlike any other. He didn't just control the day, he controlled time itself. Without the sun, the mortals would have nothing to mark the passage of their existence. No day, no night, no rhythm, and that was something Hermes, even in his quick-wittedness, hadn't fully appreciated until now. As Apollo settled back into his routine of moving the sun across the sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in him. The break had not only given him a new sense of appreciation for the world and its delicate balance, but it also gave him an understanding of his place in the grand scheme. The other gods were important, of course, but Apollo realized that his role wasn't just essential, it was central. The world depended on him in ways that transcended even his understanding. But Apollo's reflection didn't stop there. He had noticed how the mortals had reacted, how frightened they had been in his absence, how they had turned to their gods in desperation. There had been a deep, almost primal fear in their hearts, a fear of losing the sunlight, of losing the very cycle of day and night. Apollo had always known that the mortals relied on his light, but he had never fully understood just how much. Now, he realized that his role wasn't just to shine for the sake of beauty or light. It was to provide structure, to mark time, to offer continuity. His presence was essential, and that realization gave him a deeper sense of purpose. For the gods, it was clear that the lessons of Apollo's day off would not be forgotten. They, too, began to see their responsibilities in a new light. Apollo's absence had disrupted the mortal world, but it had also given the gods an opportunity to reflect on their roles and their own need for balance. Perhaps they, too, needed to take breaks, to pause in their eternal duties and reevaluate the cosmic order. After all, even the gods were not immune to the passage of time, to the wear and tear of infinite responsibility. Even Zeus, who had been the most concerned about Apollo's absence, came to appreciate that this brief moment of disruption had provided invaluable insights. He saw now that the gods, despite their immortality, were not infallible. The balance of the universe wasn't just about fulfilling duties, it was about recognizing the delicate interdependence between all things, whether mortal or divine. Apollo's break had shown him that no one, not even a god, could carry the weight of the universe without taking a moment to step back, breathe, and reflect. As the night wore on and the stars twinkled in the sky, Apollo, once again in full command of the heavens, could feel the weight of his role more profoundly. He had taken a break, and while the world had continued in his absence, it was clear to him that he was not just a passive figure in the sky. He was an active participant in the world's cosmic dance, a dance that required both action and reflection, both light and shadow. He had learned something valuable. Sometimes the greatest power came not from doing, but from understanding the deeper meaning behind what you do. With the sun rising on a new day, Apollo continued his journey across the sky, but with a lighter heart, carrying the wisdom of his break with him. The gods of Olympus, too, had learned their lesson. The balance between work and rest, between action and reflection, was just as important for them as it was for mortals. And while the world turned again, the gods would remember Apollo's brief absence, not as a failure, but as a moment of understanding that would shape the future of the divine order. With the world once again basking in the warmth of Apollo's rays, the gods and mortals alike settled back into their routines. The world felt stable again, as if nothing had ever been amiss. But, as the sun began its familiar journey across the sky, a strange sense of quiet understanding lingered. Apollo's break had served as a reminder to the gods, but it had also revealed something deeper about the nature of the divine, something they had perhaps overlooked in their endless duties. Apollo, for all his radiance and brilliance, had spent millennia without taking a pause, without stepping back from his celestial chariot. His moment of rest had not just been a day off, it had been an opportunity for introspection. The gods, too, had been so consumed with their responsibilities that they hadn't realized how vital it was for them to reflect on their roles. The mortals, always dependent on the divine, were more than just subjects to be ruled. They were participants in the cosmic order, and their lives were just as interconnected to the gods as the sun's rays were to the earth. For Apollo, this realization came with a newfound sense of purpose. His job wasn't just to light the world, it was to create order, to help keep time moving, and to offer the steadiness that mortals depended on. The absence of his light had shown him how deeply his presence was felt by the world, and it had also made him appreciate the quiet moments of reflection that he had taken for granted. Apollo had always been the god of radiant energy, but now, he understood that even in his blazing light, there was room for quiet reflection and thought. But it wasn't just Apollo who had learned from his time away. The gods, once hesitant to take breaks or pause their endless tasks, began to consider the value of rest in a new light. Zeus, the king of the gods, looked down at the world and saw something different in the way the mortals lived their lives. He had always seen them as subjects to be governed, but now, after watching their response to Apollo's absence, he saw them as beings that could teach the gods something, too. The mortals had learned to adapt when Apollo's rays had vanished. They had faced the uncertainty with courage and resilience, even in the face of divine absence. It was then that Zeus began to understand the importance of balance. He, like Apollo, had always been at the center of things, moving the pieces of the divine world with his mighty thunderbolt. But the gods, as powerful as they were still part of something greater, a balance of forces that required not just action, but also reflection. Perhaps, just perhaps, the gods needed to step back once in a while to understand their true purpose in the cosmic order. This realization didn't come easily, especially for Zeus, who was used to being the unchallenged leader of Olympus. But after seeing the chaos that Apollo's absence had caused, he began to understand that there was no shame in taking a moment of rest, even for the gods. It was a humbling thought, but one that would change the way the gods saw their eternal duties. As for Apollo, his role as the sun god had never felt more important, but it had also never felt more connected to the greater cosmic rhythm. His break, brief as it was, had given him the insight that his role wasn't just about shining brightly, it was about contributing to a larger balance. The sun was an essential force in the universe, but it wasn't the only force. The moon, the stars, the winds, and even the gods themselves all played a part in the grand tapestry of the cosmos. Apollo's presence was necessary, but it was just one part of a much larger picture. Down below, the world was now fully aware of Apollo's return, and the relief was palpable. Farmers resumed their work, sailors set sail, and the animals felt the warmth they had been missing for so long. The world felt right again. But as mortals carried on with their daily lives, many of them couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something subtle but significant. It wasn't just that the sun had returned, it was that the world had been reminded of the delicate balance between the gods and the earth, between light and dark, between work and rest. In the quiet moments after Apollo's return, when the sun had settled into its familiar position in the sky, the people began to appreciate the rhythm of life more deeply. They understood, perhaps for the first time, how much they depended on the gods and how much the gods, in turn, depended on each other to maintain the order of the world. The balance had been disturbed, but now it was restored. The mortals, in their own way, had learned that balance wasn't just about keeping things moving, it was about respecting the pauses, the moments of quiet reflection that allowed them to appreciate the beauty of the world around them. Even the gods, watching from Olympus, began to consider their own roles in the grand cosmic order. They weren't invincible. They weren't infallible. They, too, needed balance in their lives. Apollo's break had taught them all something, that even the sun god needed rest, that even the most powerful forces in the universe could not function without moments of reflection. The divine order wasn't about perpetual motion, it was about harmony. As the sun set again that evening, casting a warm golden light over the world, Apollo reflected on his role with new appreciation. The world needed him, yes, but just as importantly, he needed to understand his place in the greater cosmic rhythm. Apollo's break, his brief departure from the heavens, had been a lesson in balance, and it was a lesson that he, and the gods would carry with them for eons to come. And so, as the night fell gently over the earth, Apollo continued his celestial path, his mind clearer, his heart more at peace. He had learned that even gods needed a break, and that the balance of the universe was not only maintained by light and warmth, but by moments of pause and reflection. The cosmic rhythm would continue, and Apollo would fulfill his duty, but with a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly shine. As the days passed and the world adjusted back to its familiar rhythm, the gods of Olympus couldn't help but feel a subtle shift in their understanding of their roles. Apollo, despite his radiant nature, had gained a newfound sense of appreciation for his duties, while the rest of the gods began to reflect on the broader implications of their own responsibilities. The divine hierarchy had always been clear. Zeus ruled over the sky, Poseidon governed the seas, and Apollo controlled the sun, the essence of life itself. But now, there was a deeper awareness of the interconnectedness between all their roles. The break Apollo had taken, brief as it was, had shown them how fragile this balance truly was, and how even the gods, with their mortal powers, could not function in isolation. Apollo, now fully returned to his celestial duties, was not just driving the sun across the sky with his usual brilliance. He was carrying out his role with a renewed sense of purpose. As the sun rose each day, bringing warmth to the world, Apollo reflected on the gift of his role. He was more than just a god of light. He was a keeper of time, the one who ensured that day and night continued their endless dance. The day was not just a period of daylight, it was a cycle, a heartbeat of the world that depended on him. But now, he understood that even the cosmic pulse needed to be in harmony with the rest of the divine order. Without the other gods, the world would not exist as it did. On Mount Olympus, the gods continued their discussions, now infused with a sense of humility and reflection. Hera, who had been one of the more skeptical gods about Apollo's need for a break, found herself reconsidering the value of moments of pause. She had always been the queen of the gods, overseeing the workings of marriage and the family, yet even she had grown used to the endless demands of her duties. Perhaps, she mused, there was wisdom in Apollo's choice to rest. Maybe the gods, in their eternal existence, had forgotten the importance of taking time to reflect on their roles and the world around them. Hermes, ever the trickster, found himself amused by the situation. He had watched the drama unfold with his usual keen sense of observation, and now, with the sun returned to its rightful place in the sky, he saw an opportunity for some light-hearted teasing. Maybe next time, Hermes chuckled to Apollo, we'll all take a break. Perhaps we should all take a day off, just to see how the world turns without us. Apollo, though now back in the full force of his duties, couldn't help but smile at the thought. Hermes had a point. Perhaps it wasn't just about him taking a break. Maybe the gods could all stand to take a moment for themselves, to appreciate the world they had helped create. Zeus, however, was more serious about the lessons learned from Apollo's absence. He had watched how the mortal world had reacted to the sudden lack of sunlight. For a brief moment, the people had felt lost, unsure of their place in the natural order. It had been a wake-up call for Zeus, a reminder that even the gods needed to maintain their balance. The sun, after all, wasn't just a source of light. It was a symbol of continuity and certainty, and when that certainty was removed, even for a short time, it disrupted everything. Zeus understood now that the gods had a responsibility to ensure the world remained in balance, not just through their actions, but through their understanding of their roles. Apollo's day off had shown him that sometimes, even gods needed to step back and reflect on their purpose in the grand design. As Apollo moved the sun across the sky once more, there was a sense of quiet confidence in his every movement. The world below seemed to respond in kind. Animals returned to their natural rhythms. Plants began to grow with renewed vigor, and mortals resumed their daily lives, no longer haunted by the fear of an endless twilight. But Apollo, now fully aware of the deeper significance of his work, moved with a new understanding of his place in the cosmos. He wasn't just the god of light, he was the keeper of time, the one who ensured the cycle of life continued. Every dawn, every sunset, was a reminder of the fragile balance that needed to be maintained. In the mortal world, word of Apollo's brief absence had spread among the people, and while they couldn't fully understand the divine reasons behind it, they couldn't ignore the lessons they had learned. The sun's return had brought them back to their familiar routines, but they now looked at the sky with a deeper appreciation. They realized that the world, much like their own lives, relied on the consistency of the natural order. Time, as it turned out, wasn't something they could take for granted. It was something that needed to be valued, respected, and understood. And Apollo's brief absence had shown them that. As the gods continued to watch over the mortal world, they too began to reassess their roles. They saw how the absence of one small piece in the divine order could create ripples that affected everything. It wasn't just about their individual power. It was about how they worked together to maintain balance in the universe. Apollo's break had given them all a much-needed reminder of their place in the cosmic dance. Perhaps, Zeus thought, the gods could afford to take a break now and then, but only if it meant preserving the very balance that kept the world in motion. And so, as the sun set once more, Apollo returned to his place in the sky with a renewed sense of purpose. The world, once more bathed in his golden light, was at peace, and the gods above could rest easy knowing that the balance had been restored. The lesson of Apollo's break, subtle but profound, would linger in the hearts of the gods and mortals alike. Time, after all, is a fragile thing. Even the gods must sometimes pause to reflect on the roles they play in the grand tapestry of the universe. As Apollo resumed his daily cycle across the sky, something intangible had shifted within him, an understanding he hadn't fully grasped before. Even gods, it seemed, could lose track of the delicate balance they maintained. Time, in its most fundamental sense, had always been something Apollo controlled. The rising and setting of the sun was his to command, but in taking a day off, he had seen just how much he relied on the rhythms of life, on the ever-turning cycle that marked the passage of time. The world, it turned out, wasn't only held together by the gods' power. It was held together by their awareness of the delicate balance between action and reflection. Now, with the sun shining brightly again and the world restored to its natural state, Apollo moved through the heavens with a renewed understanding of his role. His chariot glided steadily, the sun lighting the world below with its golden warmth. But, as he watched the mortals continue their daily lives, he couldn't shake the quiet realization that he wasn't just a source of light, he was the keeper of cycles. He had always seen himself as a force of energy, an unstoppable being who brought light and warmth, day after day. But now, he understood that the very act of shining was a part of a greater cycle. Without pause, without rest, the balance would falter, and even gods needed to understand when to step back and breathe. The mortals, of course, didn't know what had happened. They had gone about their daily lives, blissfully unaware of the cosmic drama that had unfolded above them. As they went to their fields and markets, unaware of the gods' inner workings, they had felt the absence of Apollo like a ghost. It had been unsettling, like a missing beat in the music of the universe. But now, with Apollo's return, things began to feel right again. The sun rose with its usual brilliance, bringing light to the world and warmth to the earth. The familiar rhythm of day and night was restored, and life carried on. However, the consequences of Apollo's day off lingered, not in the physical world, but in the gods themselves. The divine council on Mount Olympus was no longer the same. The gods had seen firsthand how the absence of one, just one, god could affect the very fabric of the universe. Even Zeus, who had been the most concerned about Apollo's temporary departure, now understood that they, the gods, were all parts of something much greater than themselves. Apollo's absence had shown them that they were interconnected, that their roles were interdependent. Even the slightest disruption could cause a ripple effect that altered the course of the world, and while the gods resumed their duties, they now carried with them a deeper understanding. They didn't just command the elements, they were stewards of the cosmic order. They weren't infallible, they needed each other. The power they held was not just about their individual dominions, but about how those dominions fit into the grand cosmic design. Apollo's break had been an eye-opener, a moment of reflection that reminded them all of the responsibility they carried, not just to the world, but to one another. Hera, ever the watcher, had been quietly observing the changes in her fellow gods. She had long been the queen of the gods, overseeing the affairs of Olympus with authority. But even she had been moved by Apollo's absence. The gods, she now realized, were more vulnerable than they cared to admit. They were bound by their roles, by the expectations placed upon them by both the mortals and each other. Apollo had taught them all something important. No matter how powerful they were, they couldn't exist in a vacuum. They needed to recognize their roles in the greater cosmic balance, and sometimes that meant taking a moment to step back and reflect. Hermes, ever the trickster, had seen Apollo's break as a chance for fun, but he too had learned a valuable lesson. As the messenger god, Hermes was often the one who moved swiftly and tirelessly between the realms, delivering messages and making mischief. But Apollo's break had shown him the importance of slowing down, of taking a moment to reflect on the bigger picture. Even the most energetic gods needed a moment to pause, to understand their place in the grand design. In the quiet after Apollo's return, the gods began to shift their focus. They didn't just see themselves as rulers of their respective domains anymore. They saw themselves as part of a greater whole. The realization that even the most powerful gods could be vulnerable, could need rest, made them more compassionate, more connected to one another. And the mortals, too, had learned something from this strange episode. They had seen that the sun wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a divine force that needed to be respected. Apollo had taught them the importance of balance, not just in the heavens, but in their own lives. Without the sun, they had been lost, and now, with it back in the sky, they were reminded of their place in the cycle of life, in the flow of time. As Apollo continued his journey across the sky, now with a deeper sense of purpose, he also felt a sense of calm. The world needed him, yes, but he now understood that even gods had their moments of pause. His day off had been more than just a break. It had been a moment of self-discovery, a realization that his light wasn't just about shining, it was about balance. He had learned that even gods must step back from time to time, to ensure they were not just moving through the motions, but truly understanding their role in the cosmic order. And so, as the sun set that evening, casting its golden glow across the world, Apollo continued his journey, not just as a god of light, but as a god who had learned to appreciate the balance between work and rest, between action and reflection. The gods above and the mortals below had both learned something profound from this brief disruption. The world continued to turn, the sun continued to rise and set, but now there was a new understanding, a deeper respect for the delicate balance that held everything together. As the sun continued to make its daily journey across the sky, Apollo's return to his duties had been met with a quieter, more profound sense of purpose. He moved with a sense of grace that hadn't been there before. The world below, once unsure and uneasy, had begun to settle back into its rhythm. The day felt right again, the warmth of the sun a reassuring presence. Yet, as Apollo continued his eternal task, the gods on Olympus reflected on the lesson they had all learned from his brief absence. It was not just Apollo who had grown from this experience. The gods, in their infinite wisdom, were now keenly aware of how delicate their balance really was. They had always been the unquestioned rulers of the cosmos, each with their own domain to control and maintain. But the disruption Apollo's absence had caused revealed something critical. They weren't invulnerable to the changes they created in the world. The gods, even in their immortal nature, needed to recognize the importance of their interconnectedness. Apollo's absence had revealed this fragile truth. What happens to one of them, no matter how seemingly minor, affects everything else. Zeus, always the most commanding figure in Olympus, found himself thinking about his role as king. He had long assumed that his position at the top was unchallenged, that his decisions were the final say in all matters. But, as he observed the consequences of Apollo's break, he realized that even his mighty hand could not govern the world alone. The gods were a collective force, each contributing to the greater whole. Apollo's absence had disrupted this balance, and the brief chaos it caused was a sobering reminder of their shared responsibility. The gods, too, had become aware that their work was not just about exerting control, it was about maintaining harmony. Apollo's role was not just to shine a light on the world, but to keep the natural order in place. Without him, the very rhythm of day and night had faltered. The universe, for a brief time, had lost its steady pulse. The gods had always seen themselves as separate beings, each with their unique powers, but Apollo's absence brought them all closer together. They were reminded that the harmony of the cosmos relied on all of them playing their part. On Earth, the mortals continued their lives, but something within them had shifted as well. They, too, had felt the cosmic imbalance during Apollo's brief disappearance. There had been a deeper understanding of how fragile their lives truly were, and how much they relied on the forces they could never fully comprehend. When Apollo's light had vanished, the world had felt colder and darker. It was as if time itself had slipped away from them, and for the first time, they understood just how connected they were to the celestial bodies above. For Apollo, the entire experience had been a journey of self-reflection. His role as the sun god had always been one of duty, of service to both the gods and the mortals. But after his break, Apollo realized that he had been so focused on his eternal task that he had never considered the deeper significance of his role. He was not just the god who brought light to the world. He was the keeper of time, the regulator of balance, and the very heartbeat of the earth. His light, his warmth, was essential not just to the world's physical existence, but to its sense of order. Now, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Apollo felt a profound sense of peace. He had returned to his task with a deeper understanding of his place in the grand scheme of things. His work was not just about shining. His work was about ensuring the balance between day and night, light and dark, warmth and cold. Without his light, the world would fall into chaos. But with it, everything had a place, a rhythm, a purpose. As the day slowly turned to evening, Apollo's golden light softened, casting long shadows across the world. The transition from day to night had once again become a familiar dance, the light gently giving way to the cool embrace of the evening. Apollo's chariot continued its steady arc across the heavens, bringing the sun down to the horizon. But now, as he looked down upon the earth, there was something different in his gaze. It wasn't just about the cycle of the day. It was about the way he fit into the greater cosmic pattern. The gods on Olympus, watching the sun sink below the horizon, felt a sense of peace return to their realm. The balance had been restored, but there was something deeper now, a shared understanding between the gods and the mortals. They were all part of the same cosmic design, each playing a role, each contributing to the harmony of the universe. Apollo's day off had shown them all that even the gods needed to reflect, to understand their place in the order, and to appreciate the delicate balance they maintained. Zeus, who had been the most concerned about Apollo's break, now saw the value in the sun god's pause. The gods, though powerful and eternal, were not infallible. They needed rest, just as the mortals did. Perhaps, in time, the gods would learn to take more breaks, more moments of reflection, and not just out of necessity, but as a way to understand their true place in the cosmic order. As night fully took hold, the stars twinkling in the sky, Apollo rested for the moment. His duties would begin again with the rising sun, but for now, he could appreciate the silence of the night, the stillness that came after the day had passed. It wasn't a time for action, but for contemplation. Apollo had learned something profound, not just about his role, but about the world around him. And as he rested, the universe continued its eternal dance, perfectly balanced, just as it should be. As the night stretched on, Apollo's reflection continued. His duties were vast, but with every moment of quiet, he began to see how much of his role had become second nature to him, something he didn't often stop to consider. It was as if he had spent centuries running on autopilot, guiding the sun across the sky, ensuring the rhythms of the day and night continued, without ever truly pausing to appreciate the intricate balance it required. But now, after his brief break, Apollo saw how much depended on him, not just as a god of light, but as a force that maintained order in the world. In the silent embrace of the night, Apollo felt a sense of calm. The day had ended, but this was not just the end of a cycle, it was the end of a lesson, a period of reflection. He had learned that sometimes, even gods need a break to better understand the purpose they serve. For so long, he had been the god who gave light and warmth without question, but now he had seen that his role went beyond just shining. He was a caretaker of time, a weaver of the world's cycles. Without him, the balance of the cosmos would falter. His absence had proved that, but it had also revealed that he was not merely a celestial clockwork. He was a participant in the grand design, just like the mortals he watched over. As the night deepened, Apollo's thoughts turned to the other gods. They, too, had learned something from his brief absence. For all their power and grandeur, they were not invincible. The gods had their roles, each had their domain to rule and maintain, but Apollo's absence had shown them the vulnerability of their divine order. When one of them faltered, even momentarily, the ripple effects could be felt far beyond their own realm. And it wasn't just the gods who had learned this lesson. The mortals had learned it too. They had felt the absence of the sun and understood, perhaps for the first time, how much they relied on the divine balance that held the universe together. They had prayed, they had hoped, and in the end, they had been reminded that the gods were not just powerful, they were essential. Apollo's chariot, now resting in the sky's vast expanse, seemed to shimmer with the weight of this understanding. As he prepared for another journey across the heavens at dawn, there was a sense of quiet strength in his heart. His role was not just about brilliance, it was about presence, about maintaining a steady rhythm that the world could depend on. He had seen the world falter in his absence, and now, he understood how his radiance shaped not just the land, but the very flow of time itself. The gods of Olympus, each in their own way, had seen the value of balance. Zeus, in particular, had come to understand the delicate nature of their responsibilities. Power, as it turned out, was not enough. It was the awareness of one's role in the grand cosmic design that made the gods truly powerful. Each of them, from Poseidon's dominion over the seas to Hera's reign over marriage and family, had a part to play. But Apollo, with his break from the sky, had shown them that even they were not invincible. Even gods needed to reflect, to pause, and to understand the true importance of their roles. Meanwhile, mortals, having regained the light of the sun, felt a sense of relief. They went about their lives, their daily routines restored, but something had changed. They looked up at the sky with a deeper appreciation, as if the very act of seeing Apollo's sun rise and set held a deeper meaning. For the first time, they understood that the sun was not just a natural phenomenon. It was a divine act, a moment of grace that they could depend on, day in and day out. The world had returned to its natural order, but the memory of Apollo's brief absence remained in their minds. It had shown them how fragile the cycles of life could be, how important it was to appreciate the constancy of the divine, and how much they relied on the gods above. And yet, there was no grand ceremony or praise for Apollo's return. The world simply went on. The sun continued its journey, day after day, and mortals lived beneath its rays. But as the sun rose again the following morning, there was a quiet recognition, both in the hearts of the gods and the mortals, that something had shifted. It wasn't just the return of light, it was the return of understanding. Apollo had learned that his role wasn't just about shining. It was about providing order, about marking the rhythm of life. His break, brief as it was, had shown him the importance of the cosmic balance. As Apollo's chariot began its ascent into the sky once again, there was a sense of peace that filled him. He had learned, and in learning, he had grown. His absence had brought clarity, not just to him, but to the gods and mortals who depended on him. The balance had been restored, but it was a new balance, one forged from reflection and understanding. And so, as the world once again basked in Apollo's radiant light, he carried with him the lessons of his brief break. He had come to understand that even gods needed to pause, to reflect, and to appreciate the world they helped shape. The sun, once again, shone brightly over the earth, but this time, Apollo knew that his light was not just a gift, it was a vital part of a greater, interconnected universe, one that required both action and reflection, work and rest. With the knowledge that the divine order was more fragile than he had ever imagined, Apollo continued his celestial journey with newfound purpose, ready to carry the light to the world again. But this time, with a deeper understanding of the balance that held everything together. As the days continued to pass with Apollo's return to his regular celestial rhythm, a gentle calm settled over the world. The gods resumed their duties, and the mortals, who had once been unsettled by the absence of the sun, now moved through their days with a renewed sense of appreciation for the light. Apollo's role, once again, was taken for granted by most, but for those who had felt the void left in his wake, every sunrise was a quiet acknowledgment of the balance that had been restored. In Olympus, the gods were quietly reflecting on the lessons learned from Apollo's brief time off. There was no immediate action to be taken, no sudden shifts in power. But something had shifted within the divine council, a collective recognition that their roles were more interconnected than they had ever realized. Each god had their domain, but their actions, their absence, and even their rest affected the world in ways they hadn't fully appreciated before. Apollo's temporary break had caused an unexpected ripple effect, but it had also brought about a deeper understanding of the cosmic balance. Zeus, as the ruler of the gods, had long been accustomed to holding the reins of power, guiding the flow of destiny with his mighty thunderbolts. But as he looked out over the world, now bathed in Apollo's warm light, he saw something different. It wasn't just his power that kept the universe in order. It was the subtle, interconnected roles that each god played in shaping the course of the cosmos. The sun god's absence had reminded him that, even in their divine strength, the gods were all part of a larger system. And in that system, even a small disruption could lead to significant changes. Hera, watching the sun rise once more, felt a similar sense of reflection. As the goddess of marriage and family, she had always held sway over the relationships of mortals, but now, she saw how even the seemingly smallest disruption in the divine order could affect everything around her. Her duties, though focused on the realm of relationships, were no less essential to the cosmic balance. She understood that the mortals she protected and guided were a part of the same great system as the gods themselves. Apollo's day off had been a reminder that all roles, no matter how seemingly insignificant, had their place in the grand design. Meanwhile, Hermes, ever the trickster and messenger god, found himself musing on the event with a mixture of amusement and wisdom. The gods had often thought of themselves as beyond the reach of mortal concerns, but Apollo's absence had shown him that they, too, were subject to the ebb and flow of the universe. The mortal world, while seemingly chaotic at times, was deeply affected by the gods' actions, and yet, Hermes realized that the mortals had also taught the gods something. Their resilience, their ability to adapt in the face of uncertainty, was a reminder that the gods were not the only ones maintaining balance in the world. The mortals, in their own way, contributed to the cosmic order. Too, even Poseidon, the god of the seas, had reflected on the meaning of Apollo's brief absence. The tides of the ocean were often linked to the movements of the celestial bodies, but it was more than just the physical effects of Apollo's light. Poseidon had come to understand that even the most powerful gods, like himself, needed to consider the larger picture. Their actions rippled across the fabric of the universe, and it was not just their power that defined them, but their awareness of how they fit into the grand scheme. On Earth, the mortal world had resumed its natural course, but a quiet reverence had settled over the land. Farmers, now working under the steady guidance of Apollo's sun, had returned to their fields, tending their crops with a deeper understanding of the light that nurtured them. Sailors, who had been hesitant to sail during the strange days without the sun's guidance, now ventured out with confidence, their ships slicing through the waves, guided by the steady rhythm of the world once again. Life, in all its simple yet profound ways, was returning to normal. But even as the world seemed to fall back into its familiar rhythm, a subtle shift had occurred. The mortals, though largely unaware of the divine reflections happening on Olympus, had learned something vital from the gods' actions. They had witnessed how fragile the balance of life was, how dependent they were on the forces they couldn't see or control. They had felt the void left by Apollo's absence and understood the power of the natural order. It was no longer something to be taken for granted. They didn't need to understand the intricacies of the divine workings, but they now saw the truth in the saying, "As above, so below." The gods' actions, no matter how far removed, had consequences on the mortal world, and the mortals, in their quiet resilience, had contributed to the cosmic balance in ways they had never fully realized. In the quiet moments of their days, the people of the earth looked up at the sky with a sense of gratitude. The sun was no longer just a necessary force of nature. It had become a symbol of something more. It was a symbol of the divine order, of the unseen forces that held the world together. It was a reminder that, no matter how chaotic life might seem, there was an order, a rhythm, that guided everything. And Apollo, in his role as the sun god, was an essential part of that rhythm. As the sun set once more, casting long shadows across the earth, Apollo felt a deep sense of peace. His role in the world was not just about shining, though that was a vital part of it. It was about creating balance, about ensuring that the world, both mortal and divine, remained in harmony. And as he watched the sky darken, he knew that the lesson he had learned, the importance of balance, of reflection, and of understanding his place in the cosmos, would guide him for all the days to come. The gods, from their heavenly abode, also understood the importance of this balance. They had seen how one absence, no matter how brief, could shift the course of the world, and while they would continue to fulfill their roles, they now did so with a renewed sense of purpose, aware that even the smallest disruption in their duties could have far-reaching consequences. As the world below slipped into the quiet of night, with the stars twinkling above, Apollo's light lingered, not just in the sky, but in the hearts of those who lived under it. The sun had set, but the understanding it brought would remain forever in the fabric of the world. As the days passed, life returned to its steady rhythm under Apollo's watchful eye. The sun continued to rise and set with its usual grace, each dawn bringing warmth and each dusk ushering in the cool calm of night. Yet, beneath the surface of this seeming normalcy, the world was not quite the same as it had been before. The gods and mortals alike had experienced a subtle transformation, a deepened awareness of the fragility of the cosmic order. Each new sunrise carried with it not just the light of day, but the wisdom he had gained during his brief absence. He was no longer merely the god who lit the world. He had become the keeper of time itself, a reminder that every moment, every cycle, was part of a greater, interconnected whole. With each passing day, Apollo's radiant rays were not just a gift to the world, they were a vital force, a thread in the cosmic tapestry that held the universe together. But Apollo's break had not only affected him, it had reverberated through the divine realms, leaving a mark on his fellow gods. Zeus, the king of the gods, had long believed that his reign was absolute, that his power was unmatched. But now, after witnessing the consequences of Apollo's absence, Zeus had come to realize that even the mightiest gods were part of something much larger. The balance of the cosmos was delicate, and each god's actions had a ripple effect that reached far beyond their own domain. This newfound understanding changed the way Zeus looked at his role. It wasn't just about wielding the thunderbolt or issuing commands. It was about maintaining harmony, recognizing the interconnectedness of all things. The gods were not isolated in their power. They were part of a greater system, one that required cooperation, respect, and understanding. And it wasn't just the gods who needed to realize this. Mortals, too, had a role to play in the grand design. The mortals, for their part, had learned their own lessons. They had felt the absence of Apollo's light and understood, perhaps for the first time, how deeply they depended on the rhythms of the universe. The sun wasn't just a celestial body, it was a force of life, a constant that governed the cycles of nature. Without it, the world had faltered. Crops failed, the seas became unpredictable, and time itself seemed to lose its meaning. But now, with the sun shining once more, they saw the world through a different lens. They appreciated the delicate balance that sustained their lives, and the role the gods played in maintaining that balance. Even the humble farmer, who had once taken the sun's warmth for granted, now looked up at the sky with a new sense of gratitude. The crops, which had once seemed to grow without effort, now seemed like a gift. The warmth of the sun was no longer something that was just there, it was something that needed to be appreciated. And as the sun set each evening, marking the end of another day, the farmer knew that the cycle would begin again, bringing new growth, new life, and new opportunities. The gods, for all their power, had seen how vulnerable they were without the support of one another. They had always assumed their roles were invincible, that their actions were unquestionable. But Apollo's break had shown them how fragile the balance truly was. One absence, one disruption, had been enough to send the world into turmoil. It wasn't just a cosmic experiment, it was a warning. The gods, even in their eternal existence, needed to be mindful of their actions, mindful of the delicate balance they maintained. And they needed to work together, not just as rulers, but as participants in the grand design. For Apollo, the experience had deepened his connection to the world he had always illuminated. No longer was he just the sun god. He was a part of something much larger. His role was essential, yes, but it was also part of a greater cosmic rhythm. He wasn't just a source of light. He was a keeper of time, a guardian of the natural order. And while he would continue his journey across the sky, he now did so with a deeper understanding of his place in the universe. As the sun set once more, casting its golden light over the world, Apollo took a moment to appreciate the quiet harmony that had been restored. The gods had learned their lesson. The mortals had learned theirs. And the universe, though vast and mysterious, had found its balance again. But as Apollo's chariot dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a trail of twilight, he also knew that this balance was not something that could be taken for granted. It would require constant attention, constant awareness. The gods would need to remember that their roles were not just about power, they were about maintaining the harmony that kept the world turning. And they would need to remember that, sometimes, even gods needed a moment of reflection. With the stars now twinkling in the night sky, Apollo felt a quiet peace settle over him. His work was not done, far from it, but he understood it now, not just as a task to be performed, but as a responsibility to the world, to the gods, and to the mortals who relied on the sun's light to guide them. As he rested for the night, awaiting the next dawn, he was filled with a deep sense of gratitude for the balance he had come to understand. The world would continue, the sun would rise again, and the cycle would begin anew. But for now, Apollo could rest easy, knowing that his place in the universe was more secure than ever. As the days rolled on, life under the sun returned to its familiar pace, but the ripples caused by Apollo's break continued to resonate. Mortals, as they always did, adapted quickly, but their lives now carried a subtle awareness of the fragility of the balance they depended on. The gods, who rarely interacted with the world directly, watched from Olympus as things slowly returned to normal. However, the divine council was forever changed by the events that had transpired. They had seen firsthand that even their celestial roles were not beyond disruption. Zeus, ever the leader of Olympus, had always carried the weight of responsibility with an unwavering confidence. He ruled the heavens, guided the storms, and wielded the thunderbolt with such force that the other gods rarely questioned his authority. Yet, after Apollo's brief absence, Zeus found himself considering something he hadn't truly thought about before, the nature of his own power. He had always seen himself as the ultimate authority in the universe, the king of all gods. But Apollo's day off had shown him that his authority, like everything else in the cosmos, was part of a greater, intricate system. No one god could function in isolation, not even the mighty Zeus. In the quiet moments that followed, Zeus couldn't help but wonder, what if Apollo had stayed absent longer? What if the sun had refused to rise for more than a day? What if the natural balance they had all taken for granted had been disrupted permanently? The very thought was unsettling, but it was also eye-opening. Zeus realized that his own power was not absolute in the way he had once believed. The gods were mighty, yes, but they were not infallible. They were bound by the same cosmic balance that they helped to maintain. Hera, too, had been changed by the events. As the queen of the gods, she had always held herself to a higher standard, overseeing the marriages and family dynamics of both gods and mortals. She had seen the disruptions caused by Apollo's absence, and although she had been skeptical at first about the significance of the sun god's break, she had come to see it as a powerful lesson. The gods were not omnipotent, they were not invincible, they were part of a larger cosmic rhythm, a delicate dance that required constant attention and respect. Hera's role, while seemingly confined to the realm of marriage, had always been crucial in maintaining the balance among the gods. But Apollo's brief break had shown her that even her duties, though vital, were just one thread in the tapestry of divine order. The world depended not just on her powers, but on the collaboration and cooperation of all the gods. She realized now that her role, just like the others, was not to be taken for granted. She, too, needed to acknowledge her interdependence with the rest of the divine council. It was no longer just about her ruling her domain. It was about working together with the other gods to ensure that the balance remained intact. For Apollo, as he watched the world below from his chariot, there was a quiet peace in knowing that things had returned to normal. The sun rose and set with its usual grace, bringing warmth and light to the earth. But as he moved across the heavens, he carried a new awareness of his role. He had always been the god of the sun, the radiant figure who lit the world and brought warmth to the cold. But now, he understood that his role was more than just a task. It was a responsibility to the world, to the gods, and to the very fabric of time itself. Apollo had always known he was essential to the natural order, but the experience of his brief absence had shown him just how vital he truly was. The world below, though unaware of the inner workings of Olympus, had felt the change in subtle ways. The absence of the sun had been disorienting, unsettling even. The natural cycles that people depended on had been thrown off, and even the simplest of daily routines had felt strange. But now, with the sun's return, there was a renewed sense of order. The world was moving again, and though it hadn't fallen into chaos, the absence of Apollo had shown thus how much the mortals relied on the gods for the stability of their lives. The lesson had been learned, not just by Apollo, but by the other gods, too. The divine council was forever changed. The gods had always been powerful, but they were now aware of the importance of their roles in the greater cosmic design. They had seen that their actions, even their absence, could have consequences far beyond their immediate realm. The gods had seen the impact of one missing piece in the celestial puzzle, and they now understood the importance of balance in a way they hadn't before. Even Hermes, the ever-curious messenger, had come to appreciate the significance of Apollo's brief departure. He had been the one to deliver the message, to encourage Apollo to return to his duties, but now he understood something deeper. It wasn't just about getting Apollo back on track. It was about understanding the need for moments of reflection, for breaks that allowed the gods to step back and see their place in the grand design. The gods weren't just eternal beings who could do as they pleased. They were part of a system that required care and attention. They were guardians of balance, not just power. And so, as Apollo's chariot continued across the sky, bringing daylight to the world, there was a quiet sense of resolution. The lesson had been learned. The gods, the mortals, and even the universe itself had been reminded of the delicate balance that held everything together. The sun rose, and the world was made whole once again. But for Apollo, the return to his duties was not just about shining once more. It was about understanding that even gods need to pause, to reflect, and to appreciate the balance they are a part of. The world, the gods, and the very fabric of time itself depended on the harmony they maintained. And as Apollo guided the sun across the sky, he did so with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that his light was not just a gift, it was a responsibility, one that he would carry with a deeper understanding for all the days to come. As the days stretched on, the balance Apollo had restored in the heavens seemed to settle into place. The sun continued its predictable journey across the sky, as it always had, and yet, it now carried with it a deeper significance. Each sunrise and sunset was no longer just the beginning and end of a day. They were subtle reminders of the delicate cosmic dance that governed everything. Apollo's realization that he wasn't just a god of light, but a crucial thread in the intricate fabric of time, was now part of his essence. His role, though constant, was not to be taken for granted, and this understanding, this quiet wisdom, began to ripple through Olympus, affecting the gods and their duties in ways they hadn't anticipated. On Olympus, the divine council continued its discussions, now with a new sense of awareness. Zeus, ever the ruler, had seen the disruption Apollo's absence had caused, not just in the mortal world, but in the heavens as well. His role as king of the gods had always been clear. He had the power to command, to shape the fate of both gods and mortals alike. Yet, the experience of Apollo's break had shown him that even his power was not absolute. The gods, despite their eternal nature, were part of something greater. The cosmic order they maintained was delicate, and even a small disruption could cause unexpected consequences. Zeus, standing on the balcony of his palace, watched the sun set on another day. The light of Apollo's rays cast long shadows across the land, filling the sky with a warm glow. But in that moment, Zeus knew that this light, this steady rhythm, was more than just a physical phenomenon. It was the essence of time itself, the foundation upon which the entire universe rested. Apollo's role was essential, not just to the mortals below, but to the gods themselves. Zeus had come to realize that maintaining this balance was a shared responsibility, one that extended beyond his reign over the heavens. The gods were not solitary rulers, but a collective force, each with their part to play in the cosmic order. Hera, too, had come to appreciate the lessons of Apollo's absence. As the goddess of marriage and family, her focus had always been on maintaining harmony and balance within the divine and mortal relationships. But the event had shifted her perspective. She had always known her role was vital, but she had never fully considered the impact of her actions, or the absence of her actions, on the larger cosmic framework. Apollo's day off had shown her that no god, no matter their domain, could function in isolation. They were all connected, bound together by the very forces they helped shape. And as she looked out over the land, she realized that she, too, had a responsibility to the cosmic balance, just as Apollo had. In the realm of Poseidon, the god of the seas, the waves were calmer now, more predictable. The oceans had always been his domain, a vast expanse where the tides came and went at his command. But Poseidon had also felt the ripple of Apollo's absence. The seas, while less affected by the sun's absence than the land, still felt the change. The tides had been erratic, the waters unsettled, as if even the ocean itself had been confused by the disruption of the sun's light. But now, Poseidon stood at the edge of his domain, looking out over the calm waves, and he understood, as the others did, that the balance was maintained not just by his own strength, but by the harmony between all their domains. Meanwhile, Hermes, the messenger god, continued his mischievous ways, but with a new understanding. He had always been the swift and witty one, darting between the realms with ease. But after witnessing the cosmic disturbance caused by Apollo's absence, Hermes had begun to think about the roles they all played in the greater scheme. His ability to move quickly, to communicate messages between gods and mortals, was important, but now he saw that his swiftness was only one part of a larger, more intricate puzzle. The gods' actions, no matter how small, had far-reaching effects, and Hermes now understood that even the smallest shift in their cosmic balance could have consequences they hadn't considered. For Apollo, each day was now infused with a deeper sense of purpose. The sun had always been his true guide, but now he understood the weight of his responsibility. He was no longer just a god who illuminated the world. He was a keeper of time, the one who regulated the cycle of day and night, light and dark. His brief absence had revealed just how much the world depended on him, but more importantly, it had revealed how much the gods, too, depended on one another. They were not isolated, independent beings. They were part of a greater whole, and their individual actions shaped the world in ways they had never fully realized. As Apollo watched the sun sink below the horizon, he reflected on the lessons of his brief break. He understood now that his role wasn't just about bringing light, it was about providing order, ensuring that the cosmic rhythms continued. The balance was delicate, but it was not beyond their grasp. The gods, each with their powers and domains, had a responsibility to maintain that balance, and even in their eternal existence, they, too, needed to pause and reflect, just as Apollo had done. As the night began to fall, the stars twinkling overhead, Apollo took a moment to rest. His chariot stood still for a while, and the world below seemed to pause with him. It was a reminder that even in the eternal motion of the heavens, there was a need for quiet reflection. The sun would rise again, and the world would turn, but for now, Apollo rested, knowing that his place in the cosmic order was more vital than ever. The gods, watching from Olympus, knew that the lessons of Apollo's break would stay with them. They had seen the fragility of the divine order, and they understood the importance of maintaining balance, not just in their own domains, but in their relationships with one another. The sun, once again, began to set, and the world turned with it. And as the stars filled the sky, Apollo knew that, despite the lessons learned, his work was far from over. The cosmic dance would continue, and he would be there to guide it, with a deeper understanding of his role and the balance that sustained all of creation. As the cycle of the sun continued, Apollo's journey across the sky remained the heartbeat of the world. The day would come, as it always did, bringing with it the warm embrace of daylight and the gentle passage of time. Yet, Apollo knew something had changed within him. The subtle stillness of his break had revealed a deeper understanding, not just of his own role, but of the interconnectedness between all forces in the cosmos. As he guided the sun through its course once more, he did so with the knowledge that his light was not the sole force at play. It was a part of a delicate system, one that required cooperation and respect between all the gods and the natural order they maintained. The gods of Olympus, too, had been transformed by the events that had unfolded. Zeus, the most powerful among them, now saw his role in a new light. The king of the gods had always believed his reign was unchallenged, that his thunderbolts alone shaped the destiny of both gods and mortals. But now, in the wake of Apollo's absence, he understood that even he could not control the universe single-handedly. The balance, as it turned out, was more fragile than he had ever realized. The gods were not independent rulers, they were part of a larger cosmic system, each contributing to the world's harmony. And in that harmony, even the mightiest god could not act alone. Zeus spent many days reflecting on his role, looking down at the mortal world below. For all his power, he had never truly grasped the idea that he was but one piece in a much larger puzzle. The sun, the moon, the sea, each domain was essential, and even in their eternal existence, the gods needed one another. He thought back to the moment when Apollo had taken his day off and how that absence had thrown the world into chaos. It wasn't just the sun that had disappeared, it was the cosmic rhythm that Apollo represented. Zeus understood now that no single god could afford to forget their place in the grand design. Hera, ever watchful and thoughtful, had also begun to reconsider her own role. The goddess of marriage and family had long been a protector of relationships, ensuring that the divine and mortal unions remained intact. But she had never quite understood how much her own actions, or lack thereof, affected the balance of the world. Apollo's absence had shown her that even she, with her vast powers, was not above the cosmic order. Every god, even those who thought their domains were separate, had a part to play in the maintenance of balance. Hera's realm was no less important than Apollo's. The marriages she watched over, the families she nurtured, were the very fabric of the mortal world. And without balance, that fabric would unravel. Hermes, the swift and clever messenger, had always known that his role was to bring messages, to move between realms with speed and wit. But Apollo's break had revealed something even deeper to him. Hermes had always prided himself on his ability to navigate the space between gods and mortals, to deliver messages quickly and efficiently. But now, he understood that his role was part of a greater chain, a chain that linked all gods and all mortals together. Even Hermes, the god who loved to play, had come to appreciate the importance of maintaining balance between the worlds. Apollo's absence had shown him that no message was more important than the message of balance, the idea that the gods and mortals must work together, even if they couldn't always see the connections between them. Even Poseidon, god of the seas, who had spent so much of his time beneath the waves, had felt the disruption. The oceans, which had always obeyed his commands, had acted strangely during Apollo's brief break. The tides, which were usually predictable, had grown erratic, as if the ocean itself had lost its sense of rhythm. Poseidon had seen how the absence of Apollo's light affected not just the land, but the sea as well. The forces of nature, he now realized, were intertwined in ways he had never fully understood. His domain could not exist without the sun's light, and the sun's light could not shine without the balance provided by the seas. Poseidon, ever powerful, had learned humility in the face of the greater cosmic order. And what of the mortals? The people who lived and died beneath the sun's watchful gaze had, too, learned from Apollo's absence. They may not have understood the full complexity of what had transpired above, but they knew the world had felt different. The rhythms of their lives had been disrupted by the absence of the sun. They had watched their crops wither, their days grow uncertain, and they had turned to their gods in desperation. Apollo's absence had forced them to realize something vital. The sun was not just a natural force, it was the divine force that governed their very existence. Without it, they were lost, and as Apollo's rays returned to the world, so did their understanding of the divine order. For Apollo, the lessons he had learned were not just intellectual, they had changed him, deepened his connection to the world he governed. No longer was he simply the god of light and warmth, he was a part of a greater design, a cosmic order that required his constant attention and reflection. He understood now that the world he illuminated was fragile, but it was also resilient. He was not alone in his task, and the other gods were not either. They were part of something larger, something that had to be carefully maintained. As the sun dipped below the horizon once more, Apollo gazed upon the world he had illuminated for so long. His chariot had carried him across the sky many times, but this time he did not simply see the world as he always had. He saw it as part of something greater. He understood now that his light was not just a force of nature. It was a symbol of balance, of the delicate interplay between all the forces of the universe. And with this understanding, Apollo could continue his journey, not as a solitary god of light, but as a vital part of the cosmic order that depended on harmony and reflection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Apollo's chariot continued its steady arc, the last remnants of daylight giving way to the quiet, serene embrace of the night. The world below seemed to sigh in relief, the steady rhythm of day and night having returned, but the gods on Olympus continued their reflections. Though the cosmic balance had been restored, the memory of Apollo's day off lingered in the hearts and minds of both mortals and immortals. It wasn't just a pause in the heavens, it was a profound shift in understanding, a reminder that even gods needed time to rest, reflect, and appreciate the roles they played in the greater design. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Apollo knew that his understanding of his place in the universe had changed. The bright, golden light of his sun was still the guiding force of day, but he now saw that he was not alone in shaping the world. The gods, each with their domain, were all part of a greater system, and their actions, whether large or small, had far-reaching effects. They were not isolated, independent beings. They were interconnected, each contributing to the harmony that kept the cosmos in balance. Apollo had learned this through his brief break, and now he carried this lesson with him as he moved across the heavens. For Zeus, the king of the gods, this understanding was particularly eye-opening. He had always ruled with a firm hand, certain that his thunderbolts and commands shaped the world's destiny. But Apollo's absence had shown him that even he could not maintain the order alone. He had seen the panic in the mortal world when the sun failed to rise and understood how the disruption of one force could affect the entire system. Zeus, once so confident in his control, now realized that true power came not from dominating the realms, but from maintaining harmony within them. He had learned that the gods had to work together, that their collective responsibility was to ensure the universe's rhythm remained steady, and that balance could not be maintained through force alone. Hera, too, had come to terms with the deeper meaning of Apollo's absence. As the goddess of marriage and family, she had always believed in the importance of her duties, but now she saw that her role was part of something larger than just the relationships she protected. The balance of the divine was not just about one god fulfilling their duties in isolation. It was about the entire system working together, each part interdependent on the other. Her role, though essential, was just one piece in a much larger puzzle, and she had to work alongside her fellow gods to maintain the cosmic order. Apollo's brief absence had taught her humility, showing her that even her seemingly isolated domain was connected to the greater whole. For Hermes, the ever-swift messenger god, Apollo's day off had been a reminder of the power of reflection. He had always been in motion, darting between realms with speed and wit, delivering messages and causing mischief. But now, he saw the value in pausing, in taking a step back to consider the larger picture. The gods had always been caught up in their tasks, their responsibilities, but Hermes now understood that the cosmic balance didn't just require action, it required understanding. Each god's role, no matter how small it seemed, was a vital part of the grand design. Without one, the others would falter. Even Poseidon, the god of the seas, had been deeply affected by the absence of Apollo's light. The oceans, which were usually so predictable, had become erratic during the sun god's break. The tides had shifted in unexpected ways, the waters unsettled. Poseidon had long believed that his control over the seas was absolute, but Apollo's absence had shown him that his domain, too, was part of a larger system. The ocean couldn't exist without the sun, just as the sun couldn't exist without the ocean. The two were intertwined, bound by the same cosmic rhythm. Poseidon's understanding of his role had deepened, and he now saw his place in the universe with greater clarity. And then there was Apollo himself. As he moved through his daily task once more, he felt an unusual sense of peace. The rhythm of the world had returned, the balance restored, but he knew that it was no longer just about fulfilling his duties as the sun god. It was about understanding the role he played in the greater system, the interconnectedness of the cosmos. Apollo had always known that he was essential to the world's functioning, but now he understood just how deeply the sun's light was tied to the lives of both gods and mortals. His break had shown him that, like the world he illuminated, he too needed balance. The sun was not just a gift, it was a responsibility, one that he would carry with a deeper understanding of its importance. The mortals, though unaware of the divine reflections happening on Olympus, had learned their own lessons. They had felt the absence of Apollo's light, and they had seen how much they relied on the sun's steady presence. The sun was not just a natural force, it was a divine force, and without it, their world was incomplete. But now, with Apollo's return, they understood that their lives were intricately connected to the gods. Every sunrise, every sunset, was a gift from the divine, a reminder of the balance that sustained their world, and as they carried on with their lives, they did so with a new respect for the cosmic forces that governed their existence. As Apollo's chariot continued to move across the sky, bringing warmth and light to the world, he did so with a renewed sense of purpose. The world needed his light, and he would continue to provide it. But now, he understood that his role was part of a much larger cosmic dance. He was not just a source of warmth and light, he was a keeper of balance, a guardian of the rhythm that kept the universe in motion. And as the sun dipped below the horizon once more, Apollo knew that the balance, though fragile, had been restored. The gods, the mortals, and the very fabric of time had been reminded of their interconnectedness, and it was a reminder that would stay with them for eons to come. The universe, in its infinite complexity, continued to turn, the cycle of day and night, light and dark, moving steadily forward. And Apollo, with the wisdom of his brief break, would continue to guide the sun, not just as a god of light, but as a vital part of the cosmic order. As the sun once again began its descent into the horizon, casting the world below in soft golden hues, Apollo continued to reflect on the lessons he had learned from his brief absence. There was a serenity to the way the night now began to fall, a quiet knowing that the balance had been restored, but also an acknowledgement that such balance required constant vigilance. Even a god as mighty as Apollo could not escape the delicate threads that connected all things in the universe. His role was essential. Yes, but it was not isolated. The lessons of his day off, the disruption, the confusion, the subsequent reflection, had left an indelible mark on both the heavens and the earth. The gods in Olympus continued to go about their duties, but there was a subtle shift in their approach. Apollo had changed. Yes, but so had they. They were no longer the confident, distant rulers they once were. They now saw themselves as part of a larger cosmic web, interconnected and dependent on each other. Zeus, while still the king of the gods, now carried the weight of that understanding in his heart. The great thunderer had always believed in his authority, in his ability to shape the fate of both gods and mortals with a single command. But the events surrounding Apollo's absence had shaken that belief, if only slightly. Even Zeus, with all his power, could not function without the support of the other gods. They, too, had a place in the balance, a role in the greater cosmic order. Hera, for her part, had also begun to see her duties in a new light. The goddess of marriage and family had long been a figure of authority among the gods, but she had always viewed herself somewhat separately, tending to her domain with the kind of quiet strength that defined her. But Apollo's break had shown her that she was not as removed from the other gods as she thought. She was a part of something larger, and her role in maintaining harmony extended beyond her immediate realm. Every action, every decision, rippled through the divine order. Hera had always cared for the mortal world, ensuring that families thrived, that marriages were strong. But she now understood that her work, though essential, was just one part of the balance that governed the universe. The gods did not function in isolation, they functioned together. Poseidon, god of the seas, had felt the disruption more than he cared to admit. The oceans, his domain, were not immune to the effects of Apollo's absence. The tides had been erratic, the waters unsettled. Poseidon, who had ruled the seas with unchallenged authority, had never stopped to consider how interconnected the waters were with the rest of the world. The ocean was a force in itself, but it could not exist alone. It needed the sun, the moon, and the earth to maintain its rhythm. And just as he had learned to respect the rhythms of the sea, Poseidon now understood that the other gods needed to do the same with their own domains. The seas, like the skies, needed their cycles to remain in balance. Apollo's absence had taught him that. Hermes, the messenger god, had always been the swift one, darting between realms, delivering news, causing mischief, and getting things done. But even Hermes had been changed by Apollo's break. He had learned that speed wasn't always the answer. The gods were not simply beings of action, they were also keepers of time, and sometimes, even they needed to pause. Apollo's break had shown Hermes that there was value in stillness, in reflection, in letting the world move at its own pace rather than rushing through it. Hermes, always quick with his feet and his wit, now saw the wisdom in slowing down and understanding the larger picture. He had become more mindful of his place in the grand scheme of things. For Apollo, the reflection didn't end when the sun sank below the horizon. As he watched the stars begin to appear, sparkling like distant memories in the vast darkness, he realized that his light was not only important for the day, it was crucial for the night as well. The balance wasn't just about guiding the sun across the sky. It was about ensuring that every part of the cycle, day, night, light, dark, had its place. Apollo had always known that his job was vital, but now he understood just how much he depended on the other elements of the cosmic system. The stars that twinkled above, the moon that rose with the night, these were not separate from him. They were part of the same grand design, As he settled into the stillness of the night, Apollo was filled with a quiet sense of peace. The world, in all its vastness, was not a machine to be controlled. It was a living, breathing entity, and it required careful, thoughtful stewardship. He wasn't just a god of light. He was part of a greater harmony, a rhythm that needed to be respected. The sun was his to guide. Yes, but it was also his to appreciate. The balance was delicate, but it was beautiful in its fragility. And Apollo, having stepped away from the chariot for that brief time, now understood that he, too, was a part of something greater. As the night deepened, Apollo's light softened, casting long shadows across the earth. The world below seemed to rest, the rhythm of the day now marked by the slow ticking of time, the gentle passing of hours, the quiet reassurance that balance had been restored. There would be challenges ahead, but Apollo knew that, just as the sun would rise again, so would the world continue its journey, both mortal and divine, each god playing their part in the cosmic order. And so, as the stars twinkled above and the world slept peacefully beneath a moonlit sky, Apollo rested, knowing that his role was more than just a duty, it was a calling. The balance had been restored, and with it, a deeper understanding of the divine and mortal realms. The sun would rise again tomorrow, and so too would the cycle continue, forever guided by the light of the gods and the quiet reflection that had made them all stronger. With each passing day, Apollo continued his journey across the heavens, but now, his task was not just a matter of fulfilling a duty. He approached it with renewed reverence, understanding that his role as the god of the sun was more profound than he had ever realized. The warmth he brought to the world was not just a gift, it was the foundation on which the natural order rested. The more he reflected on the events that had unfolded, the more he saw how interconnected his work was with the very fabric of life itself. Every sunrise, every sunset, was part of a cosmic rhythm that kept the universe in motion, a rhythm that depended on balance, cooperation, and understanding. Zeus, who had once ruled Olympus with an air of unwavering authority, now carried a quiet wisdom within him. His kingdom was vast, but the events surrounding Apollo's brief absence had taught him something crucial. Even the greatest of powers needed to work in harmony. For so long, Zeus had believed that his strength was enough to maintain order in the universe. He controlled the storms, shaped the fates of gods and mortals alike. But now, after seeing the chaos that Apollo's absence had caused, he understood that his power alone was insufficient. The divine realm was made up of many forces, and each one had to be respected. Apollo's absence, while brief, had revealed just how fragile their cosmic system was. It was a humbling realization, but one that would forever change the way Zeus viewed his reign. Hera, too, had changed in the aftermath of Apollo's break. As the goddess of marriage and family, she had always seen herself as the protector of harmony. But her domain, like all others, was just one piece of the greater puzzle. She had always believed that her role was central, but now she saw the truth that no god, no matter how mighty, could exist in isolation. The world was an intricate web, where every action, no matter how small, had a ripple effect. Apollo's absence had shown her that her responsibilities were part of a larger design, and she, too, needed to appreciate the delicate balance that held everything together. The gods, in their divine power, were not above the natural laws they had helped create. They, too, were bound by the same forces that governed the world. Poseidon, who had always been the ruler of the seas, had never questioned the balance of his own domain. The tides were his to command, and the oceans obeyed his every will. But Apollo's absence had shown him something he had never fully appreciated. The seas were not isolated from the world above and below. The ocean was a part of the greater cosmic system, and without the sun, it, too, was affected. The tides had been erratic, unpredictable. Poseidon had long known the rhythm of the sea, but now he understood that the oceans, like the sky, relied on the sun's light to maintain their cycle. His domain, once thought to be independent, was interconnected with the world in ways he had never fully understood. And then there was Apollo himself, the god who had set everything in motion, the one who controlled the very light of the world. Though he had always known his role was important, he had never fully appreciated just how essential it was to the cosmic order. His break had given him the space to reflect, to see beyond the physical act of guiding the sun across the sky. He was not just a bringer of light, he was the keeper of time, the one who ensured the cycles of life continued uninterrupted. The break had taught him that his role was not just about shining, it was about maintaining balance, keeping the natural order intact. And in this understanding, Apollo found a new peace. His light was not just a power, it was a responsibility, one he had learned to respect in a deeper way. The mortal world, of course, had returned to normal. The sun rose each day, and life continued its predictable rhythm. The farmers returned to their fields, the sailors set out on their voyages, and the animals grazed in the warmth of Apollo's light. They had felt the absence of the sun, but now, with it restored, they went about their lives with a renewed sense of appreciation. They had seen how easily the natural order could be disrupted, and they understood now that the sun was not just a necessary force, it was a divine one that they depended on without ever fully realizing it. The mortals did not know the details of the gods' internal reflections, but they knew the significance of the sun in a way they had never appreciated before. As the sun dipped lower in the sky each evening, casting its warm, golden light across the world, Apollo felt a quiet contentment. The day had been restored, the balance had been maintained, and he had learned something invaluable. His role was more than just to shine, it was to ensure the world remained in harmony, to provide the steady rhythm that kept the cosmos in motion. And for the first time, Apollo understood the true weight of his task. His light wasn't just about warmth, it was about the connection between all things, from the gods above to the mortals below. The gods of Olympus, too, had learned their lessons. The break Apollo had taken, brief as it was, had shown them that they were part of something much greater than their individual domains. Their powers, their responsibilities, were interconnected, and they needed to work together to maintain the balance of the universe. They were not just separate beings, each with their own realm, they were a collective force, bound by the same cosmic laws that governed everything. And it was this understanding, this recognition of their shared responsibility, that would guide them in the eons to come. And so, as the sun set once more, Apollo continued his journey across the sky, but with a new understanding, a new appreciation for his role in the grand design. He was not just a god of light, he was a guardian of balance, a keeper of time. His work was not just about the shining of the sun, it was about maintaining the cosmic harmony that allowed the universe to function. And with that understanding, Apollo knew that he would continue his task, not just with power, but with purpose. As Apollo continued to guide the sun across the sky, each new day brought with it a deeper understanding of his role in the cosmos. His chariot, once merely a vehicle of light and warmth, now felt like a sacred vessel, carrying not just the sun, but the weight of the divine order itself. With each rising and setting, Apollo felt more connected to the world below, to the gods above, and to the cosmic rhythm that held everything together. The lessons of his break, his brief absence, had been transformative. What had seemed like a moment of rebellion or rest had turned into a revelation. He was not just a force of nature, he was an integral part of the universe's delicate balance. But the gods, too, were undergoing a transformation. The divine council, which had always been marked by a sense of hierarchy and authority, now functioned with a new awareness. The gods had always been powerful, but Apollo's absence had shown them just how fragile their power could be. Without one of them, the cosmic order faltered. Zeus, once the unquestioned ruler of Olympus, now saw his leadership in a new light. He had always believed in his authority, his ability to control the skies and shape the fate of gods and mortals alike. But now, he understood that even his mighty thunderbolt was not enough to maintain balance on its own. The gods were part of a greater system, and each role, no matter how seemingly small, was crucial to the functioning of the whole. Hera, too, had been changed by the experience. As the goddess of marriage and family, she had always seen herself as the protector of relationships, but she had never fully realized how much her role depended on the larger cosmic framework. Apollo's break had shown her that her domain, though essential, was just one part of a much larger design. Without balance in the cosmos, even her sacred duties would falter. The gods were not independent beings, they were part of a collective force that held the universe together. Hera, who had always taken her responsibilities seriously, now understood the importance of working together with the other gods to maintain the divine order. Poseidon, the god of the seas, had never been one to question the power of his domain. The oceans, vast and seemingly infinite, were his to command, but Apollo's absence had unsettled him. The tides, which were usually predictable, had become erratic and unpredictable. Poseidon had always believed in the power of the sea, but now he saw how deeply the ocean was connected to the sun, to Apollo's light. The waves, like the world itself, depended on the sun's warmth and rhythm. Poseidon had always thought of the sea as a solitary force, but now he understood that even he was part of a greater cosmic system. His role, like Apollo's, was vital, but it was not independent of the other forces that shaped the world. Hermes, the swift and ever-watchful messenger god, had always prided himself on his ability to navigate between realms, to deliver messages swiftly and without hesitation. But Apollo's break had shown him that speed was not always the answer. The gods, like the world they governed, needed balance. Hermes had always been quick to act, to deliver and retrieve, to move between the realms of gods and mortals. But now, he understood that sometimes it was just as important to pause, to reflect, and to appreciate the delicate system they were all part of. His swiftness, though important, was only one part of the greater whole. For Apollo, the experience of taking a break had not just been a lesson in his own significance. It had been a lesson in humility, a reminder that even the greatest gods could not exist in isolation. His role was essential, yes, but it was also part of a greater rhythm, a system that relied on each god, each force, to play their part. The sun was not just a source of light, it was a guiding force in the grand dance of the cosmos. Apollo had always known that his light was needed, but now he understood how deeply it was tied to the world around him. Without the sun, the earth would wither, time would falter, and the very fabric of life would unravel. But with it, the world continued to thrive, to grow, and to evolve. The mortals, too, had learned something profound from Apollo's absence. They had felt the disruption, the unsettling stillness of a world without the sun. And in that moment of uncertainty, they had turned to their gods, hoping for guidance, for reassurance. They had learned that the sun was not just a natural force, it was a divine force, a gift from the gods that kept the world in balance. Without it, the rhythm of life would be lost. The mortals had learned that the gods were not distant, unreachable beings. They were intimately connected to the world they governed, and their absence, as Apollo's had shown, was felt in every corner of the earth. As Apollo continued his journey across the sky, bringing light and warmth to the world, he did so with a new sense of purpose. He had always been the god of the sun, the source of light and warmth for the world. But now, he saw himself as something more. He was a guardian of balance, a keeper of the rhythm of life. His light was not just a force of nature, it was a divine responsibility, one that required constant attention, constant reflection. He was no longer just the sun god. He was a vital part of the cosmic order, a link in a chain that bound the gods, the mortals, and the very fabric of existence together. And so, as the world below continued to spin, Apollo continued to guide his sun across the sky. Each sunrise, each sunset, was a reminder of the balance that had been restored. But it was also a reminder that even gods needed to pause, to reflect, and to appreciate their role in the greater design. The gods were not just rulers, they were part of a system, a cosmic dance that required their cooperation and understanding. And as Apollo guided the sun, he did so with the quiet knowledge that his place in the universe was not just a duty, it was a responsibility that he would carry with humility for all eternity. As Apollo's chariot continued its daily journey across the sky, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a gentle reminder that the gods had come to understand something deeper than the usual rhythms of life. Though life on Earth had returned to its familiar routine, the lessons of the past few weeks lingered, like a soft hum in the background of existence. Apollo's brief absence had changed the way the gods saw themselves, and it had changed the way the mortals saw the world around them. The delicate balance that had once been taken for granted was now something everyone was more conscious of. Zeus, as the king of the gods, had always been the ultimate authority in the heavens. His thunderbolts had shaped the fates of gods and mortals alike, and his commands had been unquestioned. But Apollo's absence had given Zeus something to think about. It wasn't just the power he wielded that kept the universe in order. It was the intricate, interdependent roles that each god played in the grand cosmic design. Zeus, for all his strength, had been reminded that even the most powerful gods needed balance, rest, and reflection. He had watched the world unravel without Apollo's light, and in doing so, he had come to appreciate his own role in the broader system. It wasn't enough to rule the heavens. He needed to ensure the balance of the divine, just as the mortals depended on the gods to maintain their world. Hera, too, had found herself reflecting on her place in the divine order. As the goddess of marriage and family, she had always seen herself as the protector of relationships. But after seeing how Apollo's absence had disrupted the natural order, she understood something more profound. Her role wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger, interconnected web of divine forces, each of which needed to function in harmony. She, too, had a responsibility to maintain balance, not just in her own domain, but within the cosmos itself. Apollo's absence had given her the space to consider the impact her actions could have on the world beyond her realm. Hera's understanding of her place in the universe had deepened. She was not just the goddess of marriage, she was an integral part of the divine harmony that governed all things. Poseidon, the god of the seas, had always thought of his domain as separate from the rest of the world. The ocean was vast, powerful, and independent, and Poseidon had ruled it with a sense of authority that bordered on isolation. But the sun's absence had made Poseidon realize just how connected the seas were to the rest of the cosmos. Without the sun, the tides had become erratic, unpredictable. The ocean, for all its power, relied on the rhythm of the sun's movement. Poseidon had learned that even the seas were not immune to the greater cosmic balance. He, too, was part of a larger system, and he needed to work in cooperation with the other gods to ensure that balance was maintained. Hermes, ever the trickster and the messenger god, had long been known for his swiftness. He moved between the realms with ease, delivering messages, causing mischief, and getting things done. But Apollo's absence had made Hermes rethink his approach. Speed, he now realized, was not always the answer. There was wisdom in taking a moment to pause, to reflect, and to appreciate the larger picture. Hermes, though always in motion, now understood the importance of balance in his actions. He saw that the gods were not isolated beings, each moving independently. They were part of a grand design, one that required their cooperation, their awareness, and their understanding of their place in the universe. For Apollo, the sun god, each new sunrise was now a moment of quiet gratitude. He had learned something crucial during his brief absence. He wasn't just a god of light, he was a guardian of time itself, a keeper of the cycles that governed the world. His light wasn't just a physical force, it was part of the cosmic order that kept everything in balance. The world, both mortal and divine, relied on his steady presence to maintain the flow of time. And though his duties were eternal, Apollo understood now that even gods needed to take a moment to reflect. His break had shown him that his role was not just about shining. It was about maintaining harmony, ensuring that the cycles of the universe continued uninterrupted. As the sun continued its daily journey, Apollo felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world below, the gods above, and the very rhythm of the cosmos were all part of a delicate, interconnected dance. Apollo, with his golden light, was just one part of that dance, but his role, now more than ever, felt sacred. His light wasn't just a force that illuminated the world, it was a force that kept the cosmic order in place, a force that connected the gods, the mortals, and the very fabric of time itself. And as the sun dipped below the horizon once more, marking the end of another day, Apollo knew that the balance of the universe had been restored. It had not been without cost. His absence had shaken the world and revealed the fragility of the divine order. But in the quiet of the night, with the stars twinkling above and the world at peace, Apollo understood that his light was not just about warmth, it was about keeping the rhythm of the cosmos steady, ensuring that the balance remained intact for all eternity. The gods, once again, watched from Olympus, understanding that their roles were interdependent, and that balance, though delicate, was the key to maintaining the cosmic harmony. As the stars shimmered above, each god, from Zeus to Hermes, from Poseidon to Hera, carried with them the lesson of Apollo's break. The universe was fragile, yes, but it was also resilient, and it was a resilience that depended on the gods' shared understanding of their place in the greater design. And so, as the world rested beneath the stars, Apollo continued his journey across the heavens. His task was eternal, but it was now approached with a deep respect for the balance he maintained. His light was not just a gift, it was a responsibility, one that he would carry with gratitude and purpose, forever guiding the world below and ensuring the harmony of the universe. As the eternal rhythm of day and night continued, there was a sense of quiet stability in the universe. Apollo's chariot once again carried the sun across the sky, its golden light bathing the world below in warmth and life. But even as the sun moved steadily through its course, Apollo remained deeply aware of the lessons he had learned during his brief absence. He was no longer simply guiding the sun with mechanical precision. He was participating in the flow of life itself. His light wasn't just a cosmic task, it was a responsibility, one that required attention, humility, and a constant reflection on its place in the grand design. Zeus, too, found himself reflecting on his role in the divine order. As the king of the gods, he had always ruled with an iron will, his decisions shaping the fates of both gods and mortals. But Apollo's absence had shaken him. It had reminded him that even his power was not enough to maintain the cosmic order. Zeus understood now that he was part of something larger, a system that required the cooperation of every god, every domain, every force. He had seen the disruption Apollo's absence had caused, and it had made him realize that no matter how mighty he was, his power was only effective if it worked in harmony with the rest of the divine system. For Hera, the experience had been equally eye-opening. She had always seen herself as the protector of marriages and families, a domain that was hers to govern. But Apollo's brief departure had shown her that her domain, while vital, was not separate from the rest of the world. She had always been protective of her realm, but now she saw her role as part of a greater balance that required every god to understand their interconnectedness. Her duty, while sacred, was also part of a larger system that required cooperation with other gods. She, too, had a responsibility to maintain harmony, not just within her domain, but in the greater cosmic order. Poseidon, watching the waves crash against the shore, had come to a similar realization. As the god of the seas, he had always thought of his domain as independent, separate from the world above. But Apollo's absence had revealed to him the interconnectedness of the cosmos. Without the sun's warmth, the tides had become erratic and unpredictable. Even the mighty seas, it seemed, were part of a greater rhythm, a cosmic dance that depended on balance. Poseidon had never fully understood this until now. His domain, though vast and powerful, was just one part of a much larger system, and he needed to work in harmony with the other gods to maintain that balance. Hermes, ever the trickster, had also been affected by Apollo's break. As the messenger god, Hermes had always been the one to move swiftly, darting between realms with speed and wit. But Apollo's absence had shown him that speed, while valuable, was not the only thing that mattered. The gods, like the mortals, needed moments of pause, moments of reflection. Hermes, in his quick-moving nature, had never truly understood this before. But now, he saw that the cosmic order wasn't just about doing, It was about being, about understanding the larger picture and appreciating the role each god played in the divine balance. And then, of course, there was Apollo himself. As he guided the sun across the sky, he did so with a new sense of purpose. His chariot moved steadily, the light he carried spreading warmth and life across the world below. But Apollo was no longer just fulfilling his cosmic task. He was aware of the responsibility that came with his role. His light wasn't just a force that illuminated the world, it was a force that connected the gods, the mortals, and the very fabric of time. Without his light, the universe would falter. He understood now that his role wasn't just about shining. It was about maintaining balance, ensuring that the cycles of life continued without interruption. The world below had resumed its usual course, but the mortals had also learned something. They had felt the disruption when Apollo's sun had failed to rise. The world had seemed darker, quieter, and more uncertain. But now, with the sun shining brightly once again, the people went about their lives with a renewed sense of appreciation. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that their lives were not just controlled by the natural forces, they were guided by divine will. Apollo's absence had shown them how fragile their existence was without the gods, and now, as the sun rose once more, they understood the significance of the light they had so often taken for granted. The balance that had been disrupted had now been restored, and the universe seemed to breathe again. The sun moved across the sky, the stars twinkled in the night, and the world continued to turn. But the gods knew that the lesson of Apollo's absence was one they would carry with them for all eternity. They had seen how fragile the balance could be, how easily the cosmic order could be thrown into disarray. But they had also seen how the world could heal, how the light could return. The gods, the mortals, and even the forces of nature were all part of a grand design, one that required careful attention, respect, and understanding. As Apollo's chariot dipped below the horizon once again, casting the world in the peaceful shadows of night, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The world was whole again. The balance had been restored, and he was no longer just the god who illuminated the sky. He was the keeper of that balance, the one who ensured the rhythm of the universe continued. And as the night deepened, with the stars shining bright above and the world resting beneath, Apollo understood that his role was not just to shine, but to ensure that the light never faltered, that the cosmic dance continued. The lessons of his break, though quiet and subtle, would stay with him forever. He was not just a god of the sun, he was a vital part of the cosmic system that held the universe together. And with each new sunrise, Apollo carried that understanding with him, guiding the sun and ensuring that the balance would remain, both in the heavens and on earth. The days turned to weeks, and life resumed beneath the steady gaze of Apollo's sun. The gods of Olympus carried on their eternal tasks, but something had shifted within them. Each of them, from the mighty Zeus to the ever-curious Hermes, now understood that the balance of the universe was a shared responsibility. Apollo's brief absence had shown them the fragility of their roles and the interconnectedness between all things, whether divine or mortal. As the sun rose each morning, a sense of purpose filled the hearts of the gods. The world below continued its constant cycle, but the divine understanding had deepened. It was no longer enough to simply exist in their respective domains. Each god had a role to play, not just in shaping the world, but in maintaining the delicate harmony that kept the universe in motion. The rhythm of time, the dance between light and dark, warmth and cold, was not an accident. It was an intricate balance that required their cooperation and reflection. In Olympus, Zeus had become quieter, thoughtful. As the king of the gods, he had always seen himself as the central figure in the divine order. But now, after Apollo's absence, he had come to see that his power was not enough to govern the cosmos on its own. The world, the universe, the very fabric of existence required more than just authority. It required collaboration. His understanding of leadership had expanded. Leadership was not just about command, it was about recognizing the strength in unity, the importance of each god's role in the grand scheme. He had always ruled with strength, but now, he saw the wisdom in cooperation, in recognizing the interdependence that connected them all. Hera, too, had changed. Her role as the goddess of marriage and family had always been one of quiet authority, but now she understood how deeply her responsibilities were tied to the balance of the cosmos. Her domain was crucial to the well-being of mortals and gods alike, but Apollo's absence had shown her that even her sacred duties were part of a larger, interconnected system. She was no longer just the protector of relationships, she was a guardian of the cosmic order, a piece in a much larger puzzle. And just as she nurtured the bonds between gods and mortals, she realized that she, too, had to work in harmony with the other gods to maintain the balance that kept the world turning. Poseidon, the god of the seas, had always ruled over the oceans with a sense of control and command, but Apollo's break had shown him that his realm, while vast and powerful, was part of a larger system. The tides, the waves, the oceans themselves were not isolated from the rest of the universe. They depended on the rhythm of the sun. Apollo's absence had made Poseidon realize just how interconnected the forces of nature were. His power was not independent of the sun, the moon, or the stars. It was part of a larger, cosmic balance that required all elements to function in harmony. And Hermes, always quick-witted and full of energy, had learned something about his own role as well. As the messenger god, he had always prided himself on his speed and efficiency. He darted between realms, carrying messages and running errands for the gods. But Apollo's break had shown him that sometimes speed wasn't enough. The gods were not just in a race to accomplish their tasks. They were part of a rhythm, a cycle that required reflection, understanding, and a deep respect for the balance that sustained the universe. Hermes had always been the trickster, the one who moved swiftly and made things happen, but now he understood that sometimes even the swiftest of gods had to stop, listen, and consider the greater whole. For Apollo, the world below continued to turn with a peaceful rhythm. His light, once taken for granted, was now seen as a divine gift, one that connected all things in the universe. The mortals who lived beneath the sun's warmth had learned to appreciate it in a way they never had before. They felt the sun's presence something essential to their lives, not just as a force of nature, but as a divine gift that guided their days, their crops, their very existence. The mortals may not have understood the full complexity of the divine order, but they felt the effects of it. They understood that their lives were intricately tied to the cycles of the sun, to the rhythm that Apollo maintained. As the sun rose and set, bringing light to the world and ushering in the cool embrace of night, Apollo felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His role was not just about shining brightly, it was about maintaining balance, ensuring that the natural order of the universe remained in place. The gods, now more connected than ever, continued their duties with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that their roles were interdependent, that their actions had far-reaching consequences. They were not just divine beings, they were stewards of the balance that kept the universe in motion. And so, with each new day, as the sun rose high and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Apollo continued his journey across the heavens, guiding the light that nourished the world below. The balance had been restored, not just in the heavens, but in the hearts of the gods and mortals alike. They had learned that the world, though vast and complex, was held together by something simple: balance. The gods had learned that they were not infallible, that even they needed to pause, reflect, and cooperate to maintain the cosmic harmony. And the mortals had learned that their lives were connected to the divine, that their world relied on the careful balance of the forces they could never fully understand. As the night settled over the earth, Apollo looked down with a quiet sense of satisfaction. His light had returned to the world, and with it, the rhythm of life. The gods had learned their lesson. The mortals had learned theirs. The universe continued, ever steady, ever changing, ever in balance. And Apollo, with his chariot shining brightly across the sky, carried his light with the knowledge that his role was not just to illuminate the world, but to keep it in harmony, to guide it through the delicate dance of day and night, light and dark, warmth and cold. Good night,